Chapter 360. Tony's immediately shuddered at the sight of Warren's contemplative expression, and he hurriedly put on a stern expression as he cleared his throat, and said, "I don't think it's as good as I imagined. If the spicy grilled fish is also of this standard, then I don't think there's anything special about it." TSK, when he was eating just now, he even licked the bottom of the plate clean. The customers rolled their eyes. This guy was really a duplicitous guy. But he's saying something like that now, it looks like he's going to pick a fight with Amy. Could it be that they're still not going to let Amy's onto the rankings? Some customers speculated, and felt that Tony's reaction was a little strange. It's too spicy. But it's so delicious. Boss, give me a big jug of ice water. I feel like I'm going to heaven. Right at this moment, Sconnard slammed his chopsticks onto the table, and his mouth was already swollen like a duck's beak. His clothes were already drenched in sweat, and his face was flushed red. His eyes were also bloodshot, and most of the white smoke above his head had already dissipated. There was still some smoke wafting through the air, but he appeared to be in good spirits. "My apologies, sir, but the restaurant doesn't provide ice water." Yarbemia made her way over to Sconnard with a hint of surprise in her eyes. Sconnard had been acting all high and mighty just a moment ago, and he was trying to reserve the entire restaurant, only to be reduced to a dead fish after a single insanely spicy grilled fish. "What? There's no ice water." Sconnard's voice was a little hoarse, and he felt as if his throat were about to be burned. Today, he had finally experienced the horror of being dominated by the insanely spicy grilled fish. It was as if his hands didn't belong to him at all, and all he could think about was finishing the entire grilled fish. It was simply too unbearable. His tongue and mouth had already gone numb, and his body was scorching hot. What made Sconnard feel a little uneasy was that his stomach was beginning to rumble. The spiciness of the grilled fish in his stomach was most likely going to be unbearable for his fragile anus. Sconnard's mood was a little heavy, and he needed something cold to calm himself down. He immediately flared up with rage upon hearing Yarbemia's words. "This grilled fish is way too spicy, and it doesn't even come with ice water. What kind of service is this?" "I'm sorry, sir. The grilled fish was ordered by you, and the spicy flavor was also chosen by you. The restaurant doesn't have the usual practice of providing ice water, nor does it match the grilled fish with ice water," Yarbemia said apologetically. However, this time, his rejection was more resolute and his tone was more confident. "2 dragon coins, Bill." Sconnard took a glance at Yarbemia before slamming 2 dragon coins onto the table. He then hurriedly made his way toward the door, smoke still lingering above his head. He had come here to chase after Vivian, only to embarrass himself quite a bit in front of her. Now, he was in such a sorry state as well. Most importantly, there was nothing he could say about the taste of the grilled fish, so he had no choice but to swallow his pride. He had learned a lesson today: chefs were not to be messed with, especially if they were the boss of a restaurant. As expected, the insanely spicy level really is insanely spicy. It's not something that just anyone can try. All of the customers looked on with smiles on their faces, and all of them were quite pleased to see this. Being a good person is a very important skill. I hope this young man can be a good person in the future. A faint smile also appeared on Meg's face. He took a glance at Tunney's and Warren, who were waiting for their food to be served. He chopped up the remaining half of the insanely spicy level pepper and tossed it into the pot before pouring the bright red sauce over the grilled fish. Some delicacies can fool others, but some can't. "Unless you don't eat a single bite," Meg said internally as he put down the pot. "President, how about we try something else? It looks like the insanely spicy level might be a little difficult to stomach," Tunney's whispered to Warren as he glanced at Sconnard's departing figure. "Hello, here's your spicy grilled fish, please enjoy." As soon as Tunney's voice trailed off, Yarbemia carried a large grilled fish out of the kitchen and placed it in front of Warren and Tunney's. The spicy aroma of the grilled fish wafted toward them, and both of them reflexively closed their eyes. This level of spiciness. How could it be so rich? No amount of chili should be able to produce such a level of spiciness. Tunney's was quite surprised. He had thought that Sconnard's performance was a little exaggerated when he was eating the grilled fish, But only after smelling the spiciness did he realize that this level of spiciness was most likely different from anything he had ever tasted. Warren quickly adapted to the spicy flavor of the grilled fish, and he stared at the grilled fish in shock. I've never seen such a cooking method before, and it's completely different from the grilled fish I've eaten in the past. Could it be that he's invented another new cooking method? Warren quickly adapted to the spicy flavor, and he was quite surprised to see the grilled fish in front of him. Meg had already given him far too many surprises today. He had tasted all types of delicacies in the Aden Square, and he had seen many talented chefs, but none of them had been able to amaze him with every dish that Meg had cooked. He was a genius, and Warren had to admit that. What kind of enjoyment will such a unique cooking method bring to the table? Warren thought to himself, and his curiosity was piqued. He loved spicy food, but he had never tasted anything spicy that had left such a deep impression on him. Perhaps this dish would be able to give him something different. There's no need for that, I'll take this. Warren picked up a piece of fish with his chopsticks. The tender white fish meat was enshrouded in bright red sauce, and he couldn't help but salivate. All right, I also think it's just a little spicy, but it's not insanely spicy. Tunnies could only muster up his courage at the sight of Warren's chopsticks. After all, he was the one who had requested the order. He picked up a piece of fish with his chopsticks and placed it into his mouth along with Warren. This spiciness. How can there be such a spicy pepper in this world? No. This definitely isn't a common pepper. This spiciness is so special and delicious that it makes all of my sweat glands instantly open up. The spicy flavor of the grilled fish makes it even more delicious. The skin of the fish is crispy, but the meat is extraordinarily tender. The spicy flavor is irresistible, and the delicious fish meat perfectly suppresses the spiciness to an acceptable level. Warren swallowed the piece of fish meat in his mouth, and stared at the grilled fish in front of him with an incredulous expression. This feeling is like dancing on the tip of a knife. Danger and excitement coexist, and it's addictive. Warren's chopsticks had already picked up a second piece of fish, and he seemed to have lost control of himself. Chapter 361. Master Adams, how is Vivian's condition? In an intricate wooden cabin, Michael was looking at the old man sitting in a wooden chair with a nervous expression, and he was placing a hand on Vivian's shoulder. City Lord, most of the glacial energy in young Mistress Meridian's has indeed disappeared. Even some of the smaller meridians have been significantly reduced, and the effects are far better than when I nurtured her with fire magic. If we can maintain this level of effect, there's even a chance that all of the glacial energy in her body can be completely dispelled. Adams withdrew his hand after a short while, and a hint of surprise appeared on his wrinkled face. He turned to Michael and asked, "Could it be that you've found a more powerful fire magic caster, City Lord? Or did you feed young mistress some kind of fire attribute spirit fruit? Is that true, Master?" Upon hearing Adams' words, a glint appeared in Michael's eyes, and he looked at Adams agitatedly. Can it really be completely dispelled? Vivian was also quite excited to hear that. Only she knew what kind of pain she had been through during these past few years. She couldn't sleep well at night, she couldn't eat delicious food, and even the amount of exercise she did every day had to be strictly controlled. Living like that was worse than death. City Lord, you know that I never lie. Adams shook his head with a smile, and said, however, I do want to know which master was responsible for dispelling the glacial energy in young mistress' body so quickly. Young mistress, you've wasted so much time with me over the past few years, it really makes me feel rather ashamed. I'm afraid you won't find a more powerful fire magic caster in Chaos City than Master Adams. She didn't eat any high-grade fire attribute spirit fruit, either. Instead, Michael was rather excited to hear Adams' confirmation, but a peculiar expression appeared on his face as he explained the reason. Grandpa Adams, I didn't eat any spirit fruit, nor did I find another magic caster. I only had a spicy grilled fish tonight, and I sweated profusely, and became like this after I came back. The only explanation for this is that grilled fish, Vivian immediately said. Ever since she was 10 years old, she had been coming to Adam's place to nurture her body with fire magic every month. If it weren't for the fact that she had no magic aptitude, she would have most likely been learning magic from him already. They were very close, and would often visit his place. Spicy grilled fish. Adams turned to Vivian with a perplexed expression, and asked, "Why does that sound like a dish?" Could it be that the glacial energy in young Mistress' body was dispelled from eating a dish? That's right, it was a dish, super spicy grilled fish. Vivian nodded vigorously as she looked at Adams with excitement and anticipation in her eyes. "Grandpa Adams, does that mean that I only have to eat a spicy grilled fish every day, and my body will slowly recover?" Adams nodded with a smile, and said, "If the young mistress really did manage to expel the cold from her body after eating that spicy grilled fish, then that means that the spicy grilled fish is very effective in expelling the cold from your body. As long as you continue to eat it, you should be able to slowly expel the cold from your body. Even if you can't make a full recovery, as long as you can expel all of the cold from your meridians, it won't affect your daily life." "That's great. I just want to have a good night's sleep every day and live a normal life, and I finally have a chance to realize that now. I'm going to eat a grilled fish every day until I'm cured." Vivian was so elated that she jumped up and down on the spot. At this point, she had completely abandoned her cold and aloof image, and her mind was completely filled with dreams of grilled fish and sleeping until she woke up naturally. A smile also appeared on Michael's face at the sight of Vivian's elated expression. He had already forgotten how long it had been since he last saw such a happy smile on Vivian's face. Aside from the occasional smile that would appear on her face when she was with Luna, her face was almost always expressionless. "Father, I think it's very important that we clear the name of this restaurant. It's so unfair that a restaurant like this, which can even cure my illness, can't even make it onto the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings board." Vivian glowered at Michael as they sat in a horse-drawn carriage heading toward the City Lord's castle. Michael was silent for a moment before he seemed to have made up his mind, and nodded as he replied, "I'll take care of this matter." "Well, okay." Vivian nodded as she continued, "Also, I saw the president of the Catering Association enter that restaurant tonight. If he still insists on removing the restaurant from the rankings board after tasting its food in person, then I have a feeling that there's something wrong with him. All right, go back and have a good night's sleep." Michael smiled as he looked at Vivian with a doting gaze. Tony's immediately regretted his words. He had just said that the grilled fish was nothing special, but he had slapped himself in the face in the blink of an eye. A scorching sensation spread through his entire body, and for someone like him who didn't really like spicy food, it was as if he had been plunged into spicy hell. This level of spiciness was completely different from anything he had ever tasted in the past. It was irresistible, and when paired with the delicious fish, he felt as if he were walking a fine line between heaven and hell. He was unable to control his hands as he continued to pick up the fish with his chopsticks. His mouth and tongue no longer belonged to him, and sweat was gushing out of his body like water pillars. Aside from the scorching sensation, there was also a sense of contentment. Tony's could already sense the mocking smiles on the faces of the other customers, but he didn't have the energy to pay them any heed. The most important thing right now was to use the delicious fish to suppress the scorching sensation. They could pretend that the first few dishes weren't delicious, but there shouldn't be any way to explain their current behavior, right? All of the customers looked on at the two of them who were enjoying the grilled fish amid the scorching heat, and all of them wore smiles on their faces. Perhaps only Mr. Mac could cook such a delectable dish. If they still want to maintain some semblance of dignity, then they'll probably reinstate Amy's onto the rankings board, right? Meg thought to himself as he looked on at the two of them who were enjoying the dish. "Mr. Mac, right? You really are a genius among chefs." When they were paying the bill, Warren, whose clothes were completely drenched in sweat, looked at Meg with a smile, and his eyes were filled with admiration. "You're too kind, President Warren. To be honest, I wish I could be a genius as well," Meg replied with a smile. "Perhaps you will be." Warren nodded as he placed the money on the table and turned to leave. "Ma Meng. This fish. It's too spicy." Tony's pointed at his completely swollen mouth as he hurriedly left with Warren. "What a sly old fox." Meg narrowed his eyes as he turned around and entered the kitchen. This guy didn't mention a single word about whether or not he would reinstate Amy's onto the rankings board. At 9 o'clock in the evening, Meg politely declined the customers' requests for dinner with a smile on his face. He then turned off the lights on the billboard outside and prepared to close for the day. Chapter 362. My apologies, sir, but the restaurant is already closed. If you'd like to eat grilled fish, please come back earlier tomorrow. Meg flipped over the sign on the door and replied without even raising his head. He had to reply to many similar requests every day when the restaurant was closed. I'm Michael, the man replied, seemingly trying to insist. Meg faltered momentarily before also looking up at the man, and replied without any hesitation, I'm Meg. This man was very tall and broad, and wore a set of black and golden robes with a black long sword hanging from his waist. He appeared to be in his 40s, and had taken good care of himself. His black eyes were filled with determination and wisdom, giving him the appearance of a valiant knight or a wise strategist. Michael also faltered slightly upon hearing Meg's reply. This was the first time he had received such a response after announcing his name. It appeared that this young man didn't know who he was, and didn't even know his name. A smile appeared on his face, and he began to appraise Meg with an earnest expression. Meg was wearing a set of black and white chef's robes, and he was standing ramrod straight like a long sword, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. Such an aura didn't belong to an ordinary chef. Instead, it was more like that of a swordsman who had concealed his powers. He was reminded of that young man from all those years ago. That young man was also like a sword when he was standing. However, that sword was far too powerful, and it was a pity that it had just become the sharpest sword in the world before it was forcibly broken. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the City Lord of Chaos City. Michael looked at Meg with a bright smile. My apologies, I didn't recognize you just then. A hint of surprise appeared on Meg's face, and he apologized in a slightly apologetic manner. He was naturally aware of the City Lord's name, but Meg had thought that a customer who had come to order a spicy grilled fish during the restaurant's closing hours was just an ordinary customer. Who would have thought that it would be the City Lord himself? Looking into the distance, a black horse carriage stopped at the entrance of the magic potion shop. A young man wearing black tights was looking around vigilantly. It seemed that he was indeed the City Lord. It doesn't matter. I'm just a guest now. Michael shook his head with a smile, and didn't take this matter to heart. He turned to look at the restaurant, which was still lit up, and looked into Meg's eyes as he said, I was supposed to come here during business hours, but I might not have time tomorrow, so I chose to come here at this time. I didn't think that the restaurant would be closed already. Would you be able to make me a grilled fish? If the City Lord wants to eat grilled fish, we shouldn't reject him. However, the restaurant only serves customers during business hours. This is the rule. The waiters in the restaurant should also be off work. Furthermore, my daughter has to go to school early in the morning, so I have to put her to bed early. If you don't mind, perhaps you can come back later for grilled fish. Meg looked at Michael, but shook his head. He then turned to the drowsy Amy, and apologetically said, You have a daughter. So you have a daughter. Looks like you're a good father. Michael also caught sight of Amy, who was leaning against the counter, and his furrowed brows immediately eased. He turned to Meg with approval in his eyes. A good father was even rarer than a good chef. In Chaos City, he was very rarely turned down, but who would have thought that he would be turned down by the same person twice in a row? Even though he had used his identity as the City Lord, it still didn't work. I'm not a good father. I just want to spend more time with her and give her everything that she can. Meg looked at Amy with a gentle expression. Actually, I'm here to eat grilled fish today as a father. I also have an adorable daughter. I was very busy when she was young, and almost didn't have time to be with her. I owe her too much. Also, it's because of me that her body has suffered from an incurable chill. She's been living in agony for all these years, and I can't do anything about it. Perhaps you can understand this kind of torture. Michael looked at Meg and paused momentarily before shaking his head and saying, I've never said these things to anyone else. Perhaps it's because we're both fathers. Meg looked at the City Lord, who was renowned for being a tough and iron-willed man. He didn't think that there would be such a gentle side to him. After a brief silence, he opened the door with a smile and said, That's great. Not only is my grilled fish delicious, it can also ward off the chill. Today, I'm treating a father. Then I won't stand on ceremony. A smile also appeared on Michael's face as he strode into the restaurant. Boss, who's this? Yarbemia was just about to leave after cleaning up the restaurant when she caught sight of Michael following Meg into the restaurant. Meg was a stickler for rules. The city lord of Chaos City. Sally, who was walking behind them, cast her eyes down slightly. She had seen Michael's portrait back in her family. In order to prevent the younger members of her family from offending powerful figures, her family would have them memorize the portraits of some of the most powerful figures on the Norland continent. You can go back first. This is a friend of mine. I'll take care of him, Meg said with a smile. All right, see you tomorrow. Yarbemia turned to Michael with a smile before exiting the restaurant with Sally. Michael also nodded at them with a smile. His gaze lingered on Sally for a while, and a hint of confusion appeared on his face, but he didn't say anything. Please take a seat, City Lord. You can choose any flavor of spicy grilled fish you like. Mild spicy, medium spicy, super spicy, or insanely spicy. If you want to have a good night's sleep, I suggest you don't choose the insanely spicy grilled fish. Meg closed the blinds. He had made an exception for Michael today, not because he was the city lord, but because he was a father. As a father, he could empathize with the despair that he would feel if Amy were to be hurt because of him, and there was nothing he could do to save her. Of course, Meg was also thinking about the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings Board. He had initially planned to go to the City Lord's castle tomorrow, but now that the City Lord was sitting in the restaurant, it seemed like it would be better to talk to him in person. Michael flipped open the menu for a while before closing it as he turned to Meg, and said, "Then I'll have a medium super spicy grilled fish." "All right, please wait a moment. I'll take the kids upstairs to sleep first." Meg nodded before making his way over to the counter. He carefully picked up Amy, who was already fast asleep, an ugly duckling, who was sleeping soundly in her arms, before slowly making his way upstairs. Chapter 363. President, what should we do now? Looks like that restaurant really did make it onto the rankings board through its own abilities. There are so many customers, and the prices of its dishes are so high. If we remove it from the rankings board without a proper reason, many customers will be displeased, right? Tony's turned to Warren with a concerned look on his face. His mouth was swollen, and he took a big gulp of ice water before heaving a long sigh of relief. This grilled fish was so spicy that even the ice water couldn't suppress the scorching sensation. If this were 20 years ago, I would have ranked the spicy grilled fish, braised chicken and rice, Yongju fried rice, rujiamo, and sweet tofu pudding in the top 5 on the Aiden Square Food Rankings board. Warren stopped and shook his head with a smile. What a pity. It's no longer 20 years ago. This ranking is no longer controlled by me alone. Countless customers and restaurants have formed a huge net. Although I'm still the one pulling the strings, sometimes I still have to pay attention to the thoughts of those big fishes in the fishing net that can break through the fishing net. In contrast, there was a beautiful little fish that suddenly appeared inside. I also wanted to fish it up, but perhaps watching it get eaten by the big fish was a better choice. Tony's hesitated momentarily before speaking in a feeble voice. President, I think the savory tofu pudding should be ranked 6th. Warren took a glance at Tony's before shaking his head with a smile, and continued onward as he said, tomorrow's rankings board will continue as usual, but the announcement will be delayed. The shooting star is very dazzling when it appears, but it'll quickly disappear, so all we have to do is watch. There will be many people looking up at the sky, waiting for the shooting star to disappear. Oh, I see. Tony's nodded with a contemplative expression before quickly catching up to Warren. In the office of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce, Mars turned to Cyril in a respectful manner, and said, Young Master Cyril, the Catering Association has already confirmed that Amy's restaurant will no longer appear on the rankings board. They'll review the list that we submitted this month, and try to make it as close as possible to the list as possible. Very good, Mars, thank you for your hard work. Cyril nodded with a pleased expression as he coiled the colorful snake around his wrist. He then turned to Mars, and asked, How are things with Ward and Goodnear? Will the Bastille prison release him? Mars shook his head, and said with a serious expression, Young Master, I'm afraid this is not a good thing. The two of them are involved in a level 4 incident, and it's almost impossible for them to escape unscathed. The Bastille prison is also very tight-lipped. I suggest that we don't continue to participate in this matter. Otherwise, we will most likely be implicated. Involved. Who else in Chaos City can implicate our family Morton so casually? Cyril curled his lips indifferently. He looked at Mars and said, I've already received the money, so I have to do it properly for them. Otherwise, my reputation will be ruined, and I won't be useful in the future. But Mars hesitated. A level 4 incident shouldn't be a small matter, right? If I remember correctly, Ward and Goodnia were implicated in that small restaurant. Let that restaurant take the blame. We'll bail them out, and send the owner of that restaurant to prison. That way, there won't be any problems in the future. Cyril smiled. He was very satisfied with his idea. He stroked the snake's head, and walked out of the door. If young master were to solve this matter, it wouldn't be like this. What a pity. Mars sighed. He looked at the stack of documents on the table that hadn't been opened at all, and shook his head with resignation. Family Morton was a colossus, but in Chaos City, the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple were the ones in charge. My lord, what are you doing? Meg, who had just come downstairs, looked at Michael, who was standing on a chair with one hand holding a chandelier, and asked with a strange expression. He didn't look like the calm and steady City Lord at all. I'm a little curious. What's in your chandelier? It's not an oil lamp, nor is it a magic crystal. It's very hot, but it's not burning. It's very strange. Michael also realized that his posture was a little inappropriate, but he still looked at Meg curiously. This is a type of stone that I discovered by chance. I saw that it could emit light, so I used it as a lamp. It's more convenient than an oil lamp. Meg didn't blush, and his heart didn't skip a beat. He couldn't explain the problem of electricity to Michael. If he asked him to provide electricity, then this world would skip the steam age and enter the electric age, and the system would probably explode. Michael nodded, and got down from his chair. He looked at Meg, and asked, It is indeed a type of strange stone. Mr. Mac, do you have any more of these stones? Sorry, I only have a few, and I've used them all in the restaurant. Meg shook his head with a smile. These things were useless without electricity. All right, that's a pity. Michael sat back down in his seat with a wistful expression. Please wait for a moment, the grilled fish will be ready soon. Meg hurriedly changed the subject, and went into the kitchen to cook the grilled fish. He didn't know where Michael had heard that the spicy grilled fish could dispel cold energy, but judging from Michael's behavior, he seemed to be very fond of his daughter. If the grilled fish could satisfy him, perhaps he could discuss the food rankings with him. In Chaos City, aside from Warren, Michael was the only person who could shake up the food rankings. The Catering Association was a subordinate organization of the City Lord's Castle, after all. Even though it was a free-range organization, Michael should still be able to make a decision. As such, what Meg had to do now was very simple: conquer Michael's stomach with delicious food. Michael looked toward the kitchen with a hint of nervousness and anticipation. Soon, the aroma of fish wafted out from the kitchen, and he couldn't help but swallow. It smells so good. Due to Vivian's condition, Michael hadn't had a single bite to eat that night. Now that he smelled this alluring aroma, his stomach immediately began to rumble, and he became even more expectant. After waiting for around 15 minutes, Meg emerged from the kitchen with a grill and a medium-sized spicy grilled fish. He placed them in front of Michael with a smile, and said, "Here's your spicy grilled fish, please enjoy." All right. Michael's attention was completely drawn to the grilled fish in front of him. However, he didn't immediately dig in. Instead, he began to carefully examine the grilled fish in front of him. In contrast to the grilled fish that were roasted over a fire and eaten directly, this grilled fish was placed on a flat metal plate. Chapter 364. Chili peppers can indeed ward off the cold, but normal chili peppers have no effect on the cold in Vivian's body. If she eats too much, she'll suffer from discomfort. Could it be that there's something else in this spicy grilled fish aside from chili peppers that can ward off the cold? Michael thought to himself as he picked up a piece of fish with his chopsticks and placed it into his mouth. This spiciness. Michael's eyes immediately widened. The spiciness of the sauce enshrouding the fish instantly blossomed in his mouth. This was no ordinary chili peppers. It was as if countless tiny chili peppers had exploded in his mouth at the same time, and his taste buds instantly went numb, as if they had been pricked by needle. So this was what it meant to be spicy. Michael suddenly understood where the word spicy came from. This was different from the chili peppers that he had tasted in the past. This spiciness was tinged with a hint of numbness, and it was simply too special. After biting into the fish meat, the crispy fish skin wrapped around the tender flesh of the fish was incredibly delicious. This was the flavor of sea fish. Vivian loved to eat fish, so he would often ask people who came back from the coast to bring back some sea fish. However, most of them were dried fish, and fresh sea fish would only be available when he had a flying steed. It was very difficult to maintain the freshness of the fish, and even with his status, he could only eat it once a month at most. After all, he wasn't the type to ask people to come all the way just to eat a fish. However, not only did this grilled fish not have any fish bones, it was even more delicious than the sea fish that he had tasted in the past. If such a fish were to be shipped from the coast to Chaos City, it would most likely cost more than the 1,600 copper coins listed on the menu. Michael had initially thought that this grilled fish was a little expensive, but he immediately felt that it was worth it. Even a live fish would be worth it, let alone a grilled fish like this. The spicy taste wrapped around the delicious fish. After swallowing it, he felt a scalding heat flow down his throat. After entering his body, it spread through his limbs and bones. It was like a flame burning away the excess cold and moisture in his body. The sweat glands all over his body opened up, and as the sweat was expelled from his body, a layer of mist was emitted from his body. It was as if he was sweating and steaming. What a powerful ability to ward off the cold. Michael immediately opened his eyes. The chili was indeed very effective in expelling the cold. Even a normal person like him had so much moisture expelled from his body, so the effect would definitely be even better for someone like Vivian, who had too much cold in her body. Michael, who was still a little skeptical at first, was now completely convinced. The heat flowed through his meridians, but it wasn't painful. Instead, it felt like he was soaking in hot water, and it was very comfortable. In that case, all Vivian has to do is eat a spicy grilled fish every day, and her body should be able to slowly recover. Not only will she no longer have to endure the pain of her illness, but she also won't have to endure the pain of her illness. This restaurant must continue to operate. Michael looked up at Meg. This young man was like a savior who had suddenly appeared, pulling him back from the brink of despair. Meg wore a smile on his face. He could tell from Michael's expression that he was very satisfied with the spicy grilled fish. In that case, it would be a lot easier to talk about the rankings board later. There was only one day left, and if he still couldn't make it onto the rankings board by tomorrow, then he would completely fail his mission. "Boss, can I have a pot of rice? This grilled fish is so delicious that it has to be paired with a large pot of rice." Michael looked at Meg with a bright smile. "All right, please wait a moment." Meg turned and entered the kitchen, and soon returned with a pot of rice, placing it in front of Michael. Michael scooped a large bowl of rice for himself, and took a bite of the fish meat with a joyful smile on his face. Such delicious food was simply irresistible. He had been living in self-recrimination for the past few years, and was unable to forgive himself. After removing the burden that had been weighing on his heart for so many years, Michael felt a lot more relaxed. Being able to enjoy a delicious meal was truly a joyful feeling. Meg stood off to the side and looked on silently. This man was the ruler of Chaos City, and he stood at the pinnacle of the entire Norland continent, yet he was sitting in a restaurant eating grilled fish by himself. No one would believe him if he told them about this. He was the city lord of Chaos City, and also a father. From his expression, it seemed that the spicy grilled fish would most likely be effective for his daughter, and that made Michael feel very good. "I'm probably the only one who can treat a chef like a doctor, right?" Meg thought to himself, and a peculiar expression appeared on his face. He could guarantee that he definitely hadn't spiked the food. After finishing an entire grilled fish and a large pot of rice at the same time, Michael put down his chopsticks and burped with contentment. It had been a long time since he had eaten a meal for such a long time. However, it would be a waste if he didn't take his time to savor this delicious meal. Thank you, Mr. Mac, for creating such a delicious and miraculous spicy grilled fish. Michael turned to Meg with gratitude in his eyes. You're far too kind, City Lord. It's our duty as chefs to cook delicious food for our customers. Meg smiled in response. He was thinking about how he should bring up the Aiden Square food competition without seeming too abrupt. Thank you for your hospitality. I still have some matters to attend to tonight, so I'll be taking my leave now. I'll come back to try other delicacies next time. Before Meg had a chance to say anything, Michael had already risen to his feet. He removed his hand from the table, revealing a dragon coin and 6 gold coins, and strode out of the restaurant. Hey! Like I said, City Lord, I'm treating this grilled fish to a father. Meg picked up the money on the table, and was just about to catch up to Michael. Then consider this money to buy candy for the little girl. It's just a small token of my appreciation, Michael replied with a smile, and left without even turning his head. I haven't even mentioned the Aiden Square food competition yet. Meg looked at Michael's departing figure. It appeared that he really did have something important to attend to, so he couldn't bring himself to call out to him. All right, looks like I'll have to give up on this mission. If I go to the City Lord's castle to file a complaint, it'll most likely take a few days for Michael to receive it. By then, the Aiden Square food competition would have already been set. Meg heaved a resigned sigh and shook his head. He had thought that this would be a simple mission, but who would have thought that something like this would happen? That was a horrible feeling. After closing the door, Meg took a look at the time. It was already 10 p.m., so he went upstairs to wash up before going to bed. He didn't think too much about it. After all, there were going to be more missions in the future, so there would definitely be a chance to unlock the Haagen-Dazs recipe. Chapter 365. Within a brightly lit courtyard in the City Lord's castle. Beside Robert was a stack of documents and bills, and he was carefully going through them with a few employees of the City Lord's castle. Michael stood off to the side with his hands clasped behind his back, and a dark expression appeared on his face. Many of the City Lord's castle officials were sitting in the conference room, looking on with perplexed expressions. They didn't know why the City Lord had summoned everyone here so late at night. However, seeing as the City Lord hadn't said anything, no one said anything either. They didn't know why Robert, who had been at the Catering Association for over a year, would appear here again. It appeared that he was the mastermind behind today's events. Could it be that the City Lord was planning to transfer him back? Or could this have something to do with the Catering Association? Many of them were already feeling sleepy, but they had to force themselves to remain seated. Robert rose to his feet and turned to Michael as he said, "City Lord, all of the bills have been tallied. These are the records of the Catering Association's profits from selling the leaderboard tickets since the beginning of this year. The total is 356,000,000 copper coins. Currently, the Catering Association only has 2 million copper coins in its deposit account at Buffett Banks. After deducting the wages of the association's employees, there's still 30 million copper coins missing. 30 million copper coins. Just how much money did they embezzle?" The conference room instantly erupted into an uproar. All of the officials wore incredulous expressions on their faces. They knew that the Catering Association was an extremely wealthy place, but no one had thought that it would be this wealthy. Furthermore, weren't these people a little too bold? They had practically made off with all of the money. However, everyone now understood why Michael had summoned them here. It appeared that he was planning to make a move on the Catering Association. Robert had been at the Catering Association for over a year, so could it be that this was all part of the City Lord's plan? Looking at Robert, everyone was even more in awe of Michael's wisdom and foresight. Aside from that, the higher-ups of the Catering Association have a very shady relationship with some restaurants and chambers of commerce. They've been selling the rankings for a long time, and they've also clearly marked the prices of the rankings. As long as they pay the right amount, they can guarantee that the rankings will match their expectations. Robert picked up a piece of paper and continued, "For the gourmet rankings, 10,000 copper coins will be given to the 50th to 100th place, 20,000 copper coins will be given to the 31st to 50th place, and 5,000 copper coins will be given to each additional rank within the top 30. As for the top 10, other than the money, the restaurant itself cannot be too weak. After a month of rankings, the Catering Association will receive about 3 million copper coins after deducting a few old restaurants that relied on their own strength to make it onto the rankings. However, none of this money will enter the Catering Association's income. How can a mere catering association embezzle 60 million copper coins a year? City Lord, we must punish them severely. Arrest them all and throw them into the Bastille prison, a bearded general said angrily. That's right. Furthermore, all of this money comes from the restaurants, and in order to make more money, the restaurants will definitely charge all of this money to their customers. This will only increase the cost of their customers' meals. This is far too unfair to the other restaurants that haven't paid any money. There's no way for them to make it onto the rankings, so what's the point of having a gourmet cuisine rankings like this? All of the officials began to voice their opinions one after another, and all of them were rather enraged. That's a classic example of petty officials being extremely greedy, and that's why I've gathered everyone here today. Michael looked at all of the officials present, and continued, if the gourmet cuisine rankings weren't under the name of the City Lord's Castle, then the City Lord's Castle would have no right to interfere with how it operates. However, it's already become a subsidiary of the City Lord's Castle. According to the original agreement, the gourmet cuisine rankings will still be under Warren's control, and he'll receive a high percentage of the profits every year. However, the way things are being run now is completely different from what was originally agreed upon. This is a fraud on the part of the City Lord's Castle, a fraud on the customers, a fraud on the businesses, and a fraud on the entire food and beverage industry. Michael pressed a hand onto the table and leaned forward slightly as he spoke in a grim voice. Hence, I've gathered all of you here tonight because I want all of you to join forces and take control of the higher-ups of the Catering Association. After that, seize all of the accounts and information, and identify all of the powers and figures involved in this matter. Don't let this matter rest. Yes. All of the officials replied with serious expressions. Purging the Catering Association was most likely just a show of force. During the past 2 years, many of the officials had taken advantage of this situation to start up some side businesses, and their income was significantly higher than what they were receiving from the City Lord's Castle. All of them wore dark expressions on their faces, but they didn't dare to show it. Robert will be in charge of this operation, and has already come up with a specific plan. We have to control the impact of this case and make sure that the City Lord's Castle doesn't lose its credibility. We have to return the gourmet cuisine rankings to its rightful place and become a ranking that customers can trust, not a money-making tool for the merchants. Tonight, no one is allowed to leave the City Lord's Castle. Michael looked at everyone and turned to walk out as he said, Robert, come with me for a while. A complete overhaul of the Catering Association is inevitable. However, even if we get rid of Warren, how can you guarantee that the Catering Association won't follow in his footsteps? People change, especially in the face of the temptation of money. I've seen a lot of things like that, Michael said to Robert in the study with a serious expression. City Lord, I think the most important thing to do if we want to get rid of the Catering Association's shortcomings is to reform the Catering Association. I've given this some thought, and I have a few ideas in mind. First, we can decentralize the power of the Catering Association and introduce a third-party vote-counting organization. At the same time, we can set up a supervisory organization in the City Lord's Castle that won't interfere with the operation of the Catering Association, but will be able to monitor the Catering Association's activities in real time. Second, we can reform the scoring structure of the gourmet cuisine rankings and restart the internal auditing system of the Catering Association. We'll reorganize the 16-member food review team, which will rank all of the food in the Aden Square, and use this ranking as the base score. After that, we'll add points based on the votes and comments of the customers to come up with the final ranking. Third, Robert, you should return to the City Lord's Castle after all of this is over. There's a position that suits you, Michael said with a hint of approval in his eyes. Robert shook his head with a firm expression, and said, City Lord, I still want to stay in the Catering Association. I'm sure my grandfather doesn't want to see the gourmet cuisine rankings that he founded all those years ago become like this. He's going to be very sad to see the gourmet cuisine rankings like this. After all, he's poured his entire life into this place. You little rascal. A resigned smile appeared on Michael's face as he patted Robert's shoulder, and said, "All right, then we'll do as you say. I've tasted a lot of delicious food from Laurie's gourmet cuisine rankings, so I hope your gourmet cuisine rankings won't disappoint me." Chapter 366. The next morning, Meg got up as usual to prepare the ingredients. He then woke up Amy at 7 a.m. and helped her change into her little magician robe. She was going to attend Julian's class that day. "Father, will our restaurant be able to return to the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings board today?" Amy asked as she chewed on a piece of chicken. "Well, I'm not sure. It might be a little difficult." Meg shook his head. He had missed the opportunity to complain to Michael, and he couldn't be bothered to make a trip to the City Lord's castle today. He wanted to see if Warren would come to his senses and allow Amy's to return to the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings board. Of course, Meg wasn't holding out much hope for this. He had been at a very high position in his past life, so he was able to see many things. At Warren's current position, there were many things that he couldn't control on his own. The power of capital was driving the Catering Association forward, and at the same time, it had taken away the brakes from him. It could be said that Amy's return to the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings Board was in the hands of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. As for what the Aiden Chamber of Commerce would decide, Meg couldn't be bothered to think about it. From Goodnear to Ward, then to all of the restaurants that had been crushed by Amy's, there was no way that the Aiden Chamber of Commerce would put Amy's back on the rankings board if it weren't for the fact that their brains had suddenly gone haywire. "They're so despicable. I'm so angry," Amy said as she scooped up a large spoonful of rice and stuffed it into her mouth. As she chewed, she said, "I'm so angry that I want to eat another bowl of rice." "If you still want to eat tofu pudding, then you can't eat another bowl. You can't eat too much in the morning." Meg couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of his daughter. Even though she was pouting in an adorable manner, he still shook his head with a stern expression. "Okay. I want 2 bowls of tofu pudding, 1 sweet and 1 salty." After a brief moment of disappointment, Amy quickly raised 2 fingers again. She thought about it for a moment, and her eyes suddenly lit up as she said, "By the way, Father, if I add a spoonful of spicy grilled fish soup to the tofu pudding, would it also be super delicious?" "Spicy tofu pudding?" Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at Amy in surprise. He didn't expect this little girl to have the ability to develop new dishes. In his previous life, Meg had tried the authentic spicy tofu pudding in Sichuan, but he still preferred the savory tofu pudding. The system had only given him 2 flavors, savory and sweet. Although there were still some slots for flavors, it hadn't given him a recipe, so he didn't want to experiment on his own. "Yes, that's right. Amy wants to try the spicy tofu pudding. I think it'll be very delicious." Amy nodded with an expectant look on her face. Father, you should study it when you have the time." Meg nodded with a smile. As expected, this little foodie was becoming more and more difficult to please. She was even starting to come up with new ideas. Yes. I'm sure Father will be able to make super delicious spicy tofu pudding, just like the super delicious rainbow fish." Amy nodded and ate her breakfast with relish as she told Meg about the interesting things that had happened at school. After finishing breakfast, Amy turned to Meg and asked, "Father, I've already told Daphne and Ignatsu that we'll be inviting them to our house this weekend. Can you make some delicious grilled fish for them?" "Of course. What about Jessica?" Meg nodded and reminded Amy of the obedient little lowly from last time. "I haven't seen Jessica in many days. Her mother will definitely recover after eating Father's braised chicken. If she helps her mother at home, then she won't have to come out to beg." Amy shook her head. Even though she was a little disappointed, it was clear that she was still very happy for Jessica. "Then let's go to her house during the weekend and invite her to our restaurant." Meg smiled. He could tell that Amy missed that little girl very much, and he was also a little concerned about the mother and daughter who depended on each other, so it would be better for him to visit them. "All right, Master Fu Qing is the best. Amy nodded with elation. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile, and his mood improved upon seeing her smile. Not long after that, Yarbemia and Sally also arrived at the restaurant. Meg could already guess what was going on at the sight of Yarbemia's dejected expression. This little girl was good at everything, but she just couldn't hide her emotions. He could tell what she was thinking just by looking at her expression. Boss, Amy's isn't on the rankings today again, but don't be sad. I think the Catering Association will give us a fair reply. Yarbemia looked at Meg and forced herself to cheer up. However, as she spoke, the rims of her eyes turned red, and she looked as if she were about to cry. Meg, who was already in a bad mood, was amused by this scene. This kind of comforting method was quite unique. He hurriedly said, "I'm fine, MIA. Don't be too sad. It's fine if we're not on the rankings. There are so many customers in the restaurant anyway, so it doesn't make a difference whether we're on the rankings or not. But we worked so hard and gave out so many votes. All of the customers gave us 5-star reviews, and all of the votes were cast by everyone. How could they remove us from the rankings without any explanation? This is too much." MIA pursed her lips, and tears of grievance were already welling up in her eyes. She had been watching Amy's rise up the rankings over the past few days, and she had invested a lot of hope and affection into her. Now that they were removed from the rankings, she was unable to accept it. "Don't be sad, big sister MIA. When Amy becomes even more powerful, we'll ask them to put our restaurant back at the top of the rankings." Amy reached out to hold Yarbemia's hand as she consoled her. However, looking at the determined expression on Yarbemia's face, it seemed that she wasn't just trying to console her. Yes. Yarbemia nodded. She had also discovered that she had lost control of her emotions. Meg should be the one who was sadder than her, yet she had to rely on him to console her. She hurriedly wiped away her tears and took a few steps back to calm herself down. "Are we still going to vote today?" Sally's expression was also not very good, but she was much calmer than Yarbemia. She turned to Meg with a question. "There's no need to fill in the votes today. If the rankings are still like this, then we won't be on it in the future." Meg shook his head with a hint of mockery in his voice. He had no desire to compete for the rankings when it was controlled by a single person. Chapter 367. Jeffrey, who was sitting on a deck chair in the garden, looked at Gloria and squinted his eyes out of habit. Gloria, who was still wearing a black veil, clenched her fists so tightly that the veins on the back of her hands were bulging. However, she stood up straight and looked straight at Jeffrey with her lilac eyes behind the black veil. Like her voice, she had no intention of backing down. There were only the two of them in the garden. The atmosphere was exceptionally quiet and oppressive. The only sound was the occasional chirping of insects in the withered grass. "Who gave you the courage to say such things to me? Or rather, what makes you think that I would agree to let a woman become the successor of Family Morton?" Jeffrey looked at Gloria in silence for a long time before he spoke. "It was my father who gave me the courage. He can choose to do what he truly likes. I feel that I can also choose to do what I want to do. Just like how he gave up on becoming the successor of Family Morton 20 years ago, I want to have the chance to fight for it," Gloria said in a firm voice. She clenched her fists even tighter and raised her voice. "Besides, isn't the successor of the Buffett family, Miss Hill Buffett, also a woman? If she can become the successor and guide of the Buffett family, I believe that I can do the same. I can lead Family Morton in the right direction. I think I can do it better than second uncle. I'm not that idiot, Ian. Letting a woman inherit the family? Do you think I'm going to give the entire family to her?" Jeffrey pursed his lips. His expression was full of disdain and mockery. He looked at Gloria and continued, "I gave him a chance 20 years ago, but he never showed any signs of repentance. Now, he wants his daughter to pick up what he left behind all those years ago. If it was Mickey, I might consider it. But you? I can't hand Family Morton over to a woman who doesn't dare to show her true face. Also, it's not a good habit to slander your opponent behind their backs. Grandfather, this has nothing to do with my father. He doesn't even know that I'm standing in front of you and saying these words. Even 20 years later, he won't regret the decision he made 20 years ago. You should know him better than I do. Gloria didn't back down. Instead, she took a step forward and said seriously, "One day, I will take off my veil and announce my identity and appearance to the world. I'm not ashamed of this, and I don't think that I'm any worse than any man. I'm not trying to slander my opponent, but I'm just stating the truth of my words. I'm sure I can do better than him. At least, I won't lead family Morton into the abyss." Geoffrey looked at the girl in front of him, and for a moment, he seemed to see the girl in red who had opposed him in the meeting room. Although the two of them had different personalities, they both seemed to have a tenacity that refused to admit defeat. Gloria's last words were similar to what she said on the hill that day. They were both directed at Cyril. Geoffrey sat up straighter. He looked at Gloria in silence for a moment. Then, he said, "From what you're saying, your goal is the little girl from the Buffett family?" "No, my goal is to surpass her." Gloria shook her head. "Oh." Geoffrey looked surprised for the first time. He looked at Gloria and asked seriously, "What's that?" "The president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Your current position." Gloria looked at Geoffrey and said firmly, "You sure talk big." A smile appeared on Geoffrey's face for the first time as he lay back down on his recliner. The recliner rocked slightly as he continued, "A person's goal will determine the height they can reach. If you say that your goal is her, then you'll never be able to reach the same height as her because you'll always be looking up to her. The Morton family will never be handed over to someone like you." "Then, can I do it now?" Gloria's voice was tinged with nervousness and anticipation. "No, I haven't decided if I should give you this opportunity. You can leave now." Morton shook his head, and the smile on his face had already disappeared. With a hint of warning, he said, "Remember, it's never enough to just talk. Business is far more difficult than you think. Even that little girl from the Buffett family took more than 10 years to reach her current position." "Yes, I'll remember. But I believe I can do it." Gloria nodded. There wasn't a hint of dejection on her face. Instead, there was joy on her face. This was the first time she had been valued by her grandfather since she was a child. Even if it couldn't be considered as acknowledgement, it was at least a change and a breakthrough. "President. The food and beverage." Right at this moment, Mars hurried into the garden. A hint of surprise appeared in his eyes at the sight of Gloria, and he swallowed his words. "You can leave now." Geoffrey waved a hand at Gloria. "Yes." Gloria bowed obediently before departing. "What is it?" Geoffrey turned to Mars. "President, we received news this morning that the City Lord's Castle has made a move against the Catering Association. President Warren, the vice presidents, and almost all of the higher-ups have been controlled. Furthermore, the City Lord's Castle sent a team to our headquarters this morning to seal up all of the information on our subsidiary restaurants. They're currently verifying all of the information and accounting records," Mars said quickly. "So the City Lord has finally made a move against the Catering Association? Warren's gotten a little carried away these past few years, and he's forgotten his place. It's only a matter of time before he's dealt with." Geoffrey sat up from his recliner, and wasn't all that surprised. He turned to Mars, and said, "There shouldn't be any problems with the information on our Chamber of Commerce. Send a notice to all of our subsidiary restaurants and tell them to keep their mouths shut. As long as the City Lord's Castle doesn't want to lose face, they won't make a big deal out of this." "Mars, why are you so alarmed over such a trivial matter?" Chapter 368. Fourth Tier Incident. Geoffrey stood up immediately. He looked at Mars with a gloomy expression, and said, "What happened? How did Cyril get involved in a fourth-tier incident? And his being targeted by the people from Bastille prison?" "President, it's like this. About 10 days ago, Goodnia and Mars didn't dare to slack off. He told Geoffrey how Goodnia and Ward had gotten into trouble with Amy's family, and how Cyril had gotten Ward's subordinate, Gabriel, into a fourth-tier incident. After receiving money from the two families, he used all kinds of methods to get information from Bastille prison, and tried to bribe people to get them out." After hearing Mars' story, Geoffrey was silent for a while. He looked deeply into Mars' eyes, and said, "Mars, How many years have you been by my side? 23 years, President. Mars lowered his eyes. He didn't dare to look Jeffrey in the eye. You've been by my side ever since old Jack passed away. You and your father have been by my side for most of my life. How have I treated you? Jeffrey asked. My father always talked about how good you were when he was alive. He had been by your side ever since he was a coachman. He was always grateful for your kindness. I've been by your side for more than 20 years, and you've treated me like family. Mars lowered his head even more. Since I'm not dead yet, why are you in such a hurry to pick a side? Remember, as long as I'm alive, I'm still the head of the family Morton. I'm still the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. I'm still Jeffrey Morton's #1 businessman in Chaos City. Jeffrey smiled sarcastically. Yes. Yes. Mars lowered his head. The hair on his forehead was already soaked with sweat. Although he had been by Jeffrey's side for more than 20 years, he would still think of the president who had scolded his father so badly every time he stood in front of him. He was like a lion. When he was lying on the ground, people were in awe of him. When he roared, everyone had to lower their heads. He was the king of this manor, the king of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Go get that idiot. The smile on Jeffrey's face disappeared. He withdrew his gaze from Mars and looked at the maple tree that was beginning to turn red. He said calmly, from today onwards, don't appear in front of me again. Choose the shop that is the furthest away. President. Mars's expression changed drastically. He looked at Jeffrey's expressionless face and swallowed the rest of his words. No one could change Jeffrey's mind. Please take care of yourself. Mars bowed deeply and turned to leave with a gloomy expression. When he walked out of the garden, Mars looked back at the white-haired old man in the garden and suddenly remembered what his father had said to him before he passed away. Remember, there is only one president in this world. What you have to do is to be absolutely loyal to him. That's enough. Father, perhaps I should have listened to you. Mars clenched his fists and turned to leave. His footsteps were a little heavy. He knew that if he left now, he might never be able to return to this beautiful manor. Something seemed to be missing in his heart. Ever since he was a child, he had watched this manor prosper. He had watched the young and strong president grow old. The morning sun shone on this luxurious manor, but it was like the afterglow of the setting sun. It was a little gloomy. If the young master hadn't chosen to become a teacher, perhaps this manor could have become even more magnificent. At least, it wouldn't have deteriorated too quickly, Mars thought to himself. However, he quickly shook his head with a smile as he recalled the elated look on the young master's face when he had received the acceptance letter from Chaos School. Perhaps this is the life that he really wants. Even without this manor, having the children is enough. Father, let me explain. Cyril rushed to the garden, and his face was a little pale. Mars had already given him a rough explanation of the situation, and at the same time bade farewell to him. Mars was his father's most trusted person. Although he was usually just a mouthpiece, he was the only one who could understand Jeffrey's intentions with just a glance and a cough. He had a special position in the Aden Chamber of Commerce. But now, he had been removed from his position. He would no longer hold any position in the Aden Chamber of Commerce, and could only work in family Morton's shops. Cyril wasn't stupid. He knew what this meant. Jeffrey was angry, very angry. Smack. Before Cyril had a chance to finish his sentence, Jeffrey had already turned around and slapped him across the face. The crisp sound of the slap caused all of the insects in the flowers to stop chirping. Plop. Cyril knelt on the ground. His left cheek was swollen. He looked at Jeffrey in horror, and said with a trembling voice, "Father, I was wrong. I know I was wrong, you know you were wrong." Jeffrey retracted his hand. His hand was trembling in his wide sleeves. He looked at Cyril, and raised his voice. "Then tell me, what did you do wrong?" Cyril opened his mouth, but choked. He rolled his eyes, and didn't know what to say. "If you don't say it, then I'll tell you. What did you do wrong?" Jeffrey looked at Cyril as if he was looking at a clown. He looked at him condescendingly, and said with a mocking smile, "First, you shouldn't have touched my people. The Mars father and son have been with me for decades. Loyalty is the most basic rule of a servant. When you made him obey you, you had a disloyal servant. Second, you shouldn't have changed the rules I set. I set the rule that half of the Aden Chamber of Commerce's restaurants were taken up by the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Restaurants that can enter the Aden Chamber of Commerce can enter the rankings, but the increase in the rankings can increase the restaurant's turnover to a certain extent. This has caused the disgust of many ordinary merchants. But you took up 90% of the rankings, and used the bidding method to rank. As the second young master of family Morton, do you lack money? Do you only have this little bit of money in your eyes? Do you know what the rules are? Our family Morton's status today is based on the rules. Even if the rules were set by us, we have to abide by and protect them. Only in a relatively free market would there be vigorous vitality and room for continued improvement. And you're stifling this freedom. Then what's the point of our control? Third, you shouldn't have provoked people and forces that you can't afford to provoke. Merchants seek benefits and avoid harm. This is the foundation of our survival. A true merchant should have fear and know how to protect his own wings so that he can always stand in a safe place. And you, for a few thousand copper coins, you touched the Bastille prison and got involved in a level 4 incident. Do you know what a level 4 incident means? Even if you're the son of the mayor, as long as you commit a level 4 incident, you can only stay in the Bastille prison for the rest of your life. Who do you think you are? You want to bail someone out of the Bastille prison? If you're caught because of this, don't worry, I won't bail you out. Father, I was wrong, I was wrong, I was wrong. Cyril's face was pale. He knelt on the ground and crawled forward a few steps, wanting to hug Geoffrey's thigh. Don't think that family Morton can only be handed over to you after I die. You can do whatever you want. Geoffrey retracted his left foot in disgust and said coldly, from today onwards, Gloria is one of the candidates to inherit family Morton. She has the right to inherit family Morton just like you. Chapter 369. At the Catering Association headquarters, the building had just been rebuilt a few years ago. It was a grand and magnificent building, but the atmosphere in the building was a little tense. All of the Catering Association staff members were looking at the guards of the City Lord's castle walking in and out of the building with confused and panicked expressions. They hadn't been arrested, but they had been restricted from leaving the building. Did you ever think that a day like this would come? On the second floor, Robert looked at Warren, who seemed to have aged 10 years overnight with a head full of white hair. I thought about it 10 years ago, but nothing had happened for so many years, so I was hoping for a fluke. Who would have thought that it would come anyway? Warren rested his hands on the railing as he looked down at his panicked subordinates. He looked at the Catering Association building that had been built according to his vision, and a wry smile appeared on his face. Robert also looked down and was silent for a moment before asking, "Do you regret it?" "Why would I?" Warren's smile faded as he stood up straight and raised a hand with a proud expression. "Look at this grand building, look at those Catering Association staff members, and the huge statue outside the building. I brought all of these things here. Countless customers come to the restaurant every day based on the Aden Square food rankings, so why would I regret it? Even if I didn't have the City Lord's castle, I would have been able to do the same in 5 more years." Robert looked at Warren and was silent for a moment before asking, "Do you think the president would look forward to a food association like this?" "Perhaps." Warren's expression stiffened as he slowly turned to look at Robert. He suddenly felt as if he could see a hint of familiarity in Robert's eyes, and he hesitated for a moment before asking, "Who are you?" "President Lorry is my grandfather. You should have met me when I was a child." Robert also looked into Warren's eyes. How? How is that possible?" Warren stared at Robert with incredulity as if he had heard something extremely absurd. "My grandfather founded the Food Association, but my father wasn't interested in it, and he didn't allow me to come into contact with it. After that, my grandfather handed the Food Association over to you, and he passed away the following year. After that, my family didn't have any contact with the Food Association. However, I promised my grandfather that I would keep an eye on the Food Association before he passed away, so I've been keeping an eye on it this entire time. President, you really are a genius." The rapid growth of the Catering Association has exceeded everyone's expectations. Even my grandfather couldn't have imagined that his idea of making it easier for everyone to find delicious food would become such a massive association. However, he definitely didn't want to see the Aden Square Food Competition rankings become like this, where people can rely on money to climb up the rankings instead of relying on delicious food. The current Aden Square Food Competition rankings has completely deviated from his original vision and philosophy, and that's not right, Robert continued with a calm expression. So you came to the Catering Association last year just for this day? Warren clenched his fists. I've suggested to the president many times that if the president could rein in the horse at the edge of the cliff, I wouldn't want to see such a scene either. The Food Association is the fruit of my grandfather's blood, sweat, and tears, but it's also the fruit of the president's blood, sweat, and tears. During the early years of the Catering Association, you used the Aden Square Food Competition rankings to propel the Catering Association into a period of rapid development. These are all undeniable contributions to you. Robert shook his head, and a stern expression gradually appeared on his face as he looked at Warren. However, the president has never listened to even a single word of my advice. The statue at the entrance of the Catering Association is still engraved with the slogan, "All for the sake of good food." How ironic is that to be erected at the entrance of the Catering Association now? Do you still remember the promise you made to that old man all those years ago? Do you still remember your original intentions? Do you still remember the promise you made when you signed the agreement with the City Lord's Castle? What have you been doing all these years? Before the Catering Association falls into a bottomless abyss with you, I'm going to stop it and get it back on the right track. Warren looked at the determined expression on Robert's face, and his clenched fists slowly relaxed. All of the energy in his body seemed to have dissipated, and he placed his hands on the railing again as he cast his gaze into the distance. The grand building was teetering on the verge of collapse, as if it would collapse at the slightest push. The restaurant empire that he had built over half of his life was crumbling right before his eyes. To be honest, I didn't think that things would turn out like this, either. A self-deprecating smile appeared on Warren's face as he looked at the statue at the entrance of the building, and continued, "In the beginning, I only wanted to build a headquarters for the Catering Association, but I didn't have the money, so I began to think about how I could earn money. Selling tickets was clearly a good way to do that. After that, some restaurants tried to bribe me in order to get onto the rankings, but I refused them in the beginning. I couldn't just take whatever they wanted. After all, the Aden Square Food Competition wasn't something that could be tainted by money. However, one day, I discovered that no one would actually care even if I took the money. All I had to do was change a spot on the rankings board, and the money I received from doing that was even more than what I could earn from selling tickets. I gave a portion of the money to the association, and I could keep a portion for myself. It was all up to me to decide how much I wanted to keep. After that, the Aden Chamber of Commerce came to me. President Jeffrey was indeed a sly old fox, but he also knew how to take advantage of the rules in a more natural manner. Even though the money was less than if I had just taken the money from him, the rankings board did indeed look better this way. After that, Cyril took over the F&B department of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. He was even more generous than Jeffrey, but he also had more demands, so he basically controlled the entire rankings board. I knew the risks involved, but every time I saw the boxes of dragon coins that were delivered to my office, I couldn't bear to send them back. The Aden Square Food Competition was like a sailboat that had gone out of control during a storm. From that moment on, I no longer had any control over it. I couldn't give it any direction, I couldn't control its speed, and I couldn't even set the rules. I was still the president of the Catering Association, but I knew that I was just a puppet controlled by money. When they needed me to do something, all they had to do was deliver the money to my office. I couldn't refuse. I couldn't make up my mind, and I didn't dare to refuse. Compared to the Aden Chamber of Commerce, the Catering Association was like a child that could only babble and learn how to speak. After I let it in, I was completely powerless to fight back. I could only make myself forget what my original intentions were. Every day, when I entered the office, I didn't have to look at the words engraved beside the statue. I told myself that I deserved all of this. Chapter 370. The fact that Amy still hadn't made it onto the rankings board was still a hot topic among the customers, and it was only natural that they were enraged. However, Meg's positive attitude had dispelled the negative emotions of the customers. "Mr. Mac, can't we order grilled fish in the morning? I had one last night, and it was so delicious that I couldn't stop craving it. Please make one for me," Harrison said to Mag with a pleading expression. "We don't serve spicy grilled fish for breakfast, so you can come earlier in the afternoon and evening if you want." Meg shook his head with a smile. The system didn't have any rules, but he felt that it was best to freshen the air in the restaurant in the morning. Besides, fresher breakfasts were good for one's health, and Meg was very concerned about keeping his customers healthy. "All right, in that case, I'll have a braised chicken and rice." Harrison could see from Meg's expression that he wasn't going to negotiate, so he could only nod and take a seat. "Master Turtle Shell, is my wand ready yet?" Master Halfbeard said it's almost ready. "Is that true?" Amy stood beside Julian, who was munching on a savory tofu pudding, and asked with an expectant look in her eyes. "Yes, it's almost ready. It'll be ready in 2 days at most." Julian nodded with a smile as he turned to Amy, and asked, "Little Amy, do you want Master to treat you to some savory tofu pudding?" "That's great. I'm finally going to have my own wand." Amy jumped up and down with elation before turning to Julian with a smile as she shook her head, and said, "No, thank you, Master Turtle. I just ate, so you just have to pay for me." All right." Julian's expression stiffened upon hearing this. Even though he had already agreed to pay for Amy's meals during her classes, he still couldn't help but feel that it was a little strange that he had to pay for her meals at their own restaurant. A wand that can expand and shrink at will, could it be the Rui Jingu Bang? Meg couldn't help but think to himself upon hearing their conversation. Amy's request could have been completely dismissed as an unreasonable request, but Julian and Crassus took it very seriously, and they were almost ready to make a finished product. This was indeed quite a surprise, and he was looking forward to it. As the only magic caster on this continent who was proficient in both melee and long-range magic, Remi's first wand was being crafted by 2 great magic casters was very much worth looking forward to, even though Remi still didn't know much magic at the moment. Arthur should be back from Rodu in a couple of days. I heard that he's bringing 2 more little guys with him this time. When the time comes, we'll be able to test out the wand for little Amy. Crassus just so happened to walk into the room with a smile. Amy turned to Crassus with glowing eyes, and asked, "Master Halfbeard, do you want me to be the bad guy?" You could say that. In any case, these guys don't have good intentions, so it's time for them to see how powerful my disciple is." Crassus nodded with a smile, and sat down to order a plate of Yangju fried rice. Julian looked up at Crassus, who was sitting at a nearby table, and said in a cold and raspy voice, "This is my disciple, Julian. You have to remember that. Don't worry. The entire Norland continent knows that you and I have the same disciple now." Crassus looked up at Julian with flames also flashing in his eyes, and countered, "However, it's hard to say what kind of magic Amy will use to defeat her opponents. Melee magic crushing long-range magic is the most interesting thing to see." Julian chuckled coldly, and said, Those little guys only need the flames of extreme frost to defeat them. What's the point of a little girl waving a wand and jumping around? Master Turtle, Master Halfbeard, do you want to fight? Is melee magic more powerful or long-range magic more powerful? I really want to know, too." Amy looked at the 2 of them with anticipation in her eyes. All of the customers in the restaurant also turned to look at them. After observing them for a while, they found that these 2 great magic casters had good tempers. At least, they were like that in the restaurant, so they didn't have to worry about them suddenly exploding. The battle between the 2 of them was also widely spread among the customers after it was spread by some magic casters. Thus, everyone was very eager to know when the battle between melee magic and long-range magic, as well as ice magic and fire magic, would end. Melee magic is obviously the best. "I'll have a sweet tofu pudding," Crassus said calmly as he ordered a dish. If a magic caster still needs to fight in melee magic, then there's no point in learning magic. "Bill, please." Julian also appeared to be quite calm as he placed the money on the table and left. Goodbye, Master Halfbeard. I have to go to class now. Teacher Julian said he's going to teach me a new spell today. Amy waved at Crassus before bidding farewell to Meg and the others. She then followed Julian out of the restaurant on her short legs. When she reached the door, she suddenly stopped and waved at Ugly Duckling as she said, "Come here, Ugly Duckling. I'll take you to play with black coal and green pea." Meow tilde Ugly Duckling looked at Amy, who had spread open her arms, and slowly retreated behind the counter. It stuck out its little head, and shook its head at Amy to express its refusal. "Don't worry, I won't let you fight today, really." Amy still waved at it. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling still shook its head. "I won't lock you in a birdcage today, either," Amy promised again. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed before hiding behind the counter. It didn't even stick its head out. TCH, coward. Amy wiped her nose with the back of her hand before turning around and walking away. Only then did Ugly Duckling carefully stick its head out to take a look. It then climbed onto the high stool with peace of mind, and closed its eyes to sleep with its little belly exposed. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, whose little belly was already beginning to take shape, and shook his head with a smile. If it continued like this, it would really be too big for it. "System, I've failed the mission to get on the rankings board. Give me a new mission." During the lunch break, Meg moved a lounge chair to the door to bask in the sun. He shook the chair leisurely as he thought to himself. He scattered the remaining moonlight rice in his hand, which immediately attracted a flock of white pigeons. "The mission hasn't been completed yet, so the system won't give you a new mission. Please work hard to complete the mission, and don't give up so easily. Even though there's no punishment for this mission, it will lower your mission completion rate, which will directly affect the difficulty and rewards of your subsequent missions." The system's serious voice sounded. "Holy fuck. System, are you fucking kidding me?" Chapter 371. Today, I have an announcement to make. In the lavish dining hall of the Morton Manor, Geoffrey sat at the head of the table with a serious expression on his face. Mickey had just picked up his fork, but he quickly put it back down. He sat up straight again, and looked at Geoffrey with a hint of awe and veneration in his eyes. Cyril was a little distracted. He looked down at the plate in front of him, as if he were awaiting judgment. The noblewoman sitting beside him was also quite pale. She was glaring at Gloria with a vicious look in her eyes, and her hands were clenched into tight fists. Hertie and Hanai were also smiling. Whenever their grandfather spoke like this, it was always their uncle's family that was going to be reprimanded. This had always been the case during the past few years, and it had become an interesting activity before every meal. However, they didn't know if it was their uncle or Gloria who was going to be reprimanded this time. After all, she had contradicted their grandfather last time, and even left the dining hall midway. "Master." Madame Denise Marquis, who was sitting beside Geoffrey, wanted to say something, but her eyes were filled with concern. "Shut up." Geoffrey took a glance at her, and spoke in an implacable voice. Denise immediately fell silent. She lowered her head, and didn't dare to say anything else. Lance sat up straight. He didn't know what Geoffrey was going to say, but no matter what he said, it wouldn't change his mind, even if he were to be chased out of the Morton Manor. Deborah looked down at Gloria with a concerned look on her face. He didn't hold Gloria against Geoffrey after the incident, but was she going to be held accountable again? "Did grandfather agree to my request?" Gloria was sitting at the very end of the table, and her purple eyes were filled with anticipation as she stared at Geoffrey. Her hands were clasped together under the table, and it was as if she were waiting for the final judgment. TSK, what's going on today? Is the weather going to change?" A hint of interest appeared on Aurora's deathly pale face. She took a glance at the nervous Cyril, and her interest was further piqued. Geoffrey's gaze finally landed on Gloria. He said in a deep voice, "I hereby announce that from today onwards, Gloria is a candidate to inherit family Morton. She has the same right to inherit family Morton as Cyril." The restaurant suddenly fell into a dead silence. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard clearly. Cyril and his wife's faces instantly turned deathly pale. They looked at each other, their lips trembling. How is this possible? Hertie and Herney's mouths were wide open, and their faces were filled with disbelief. They looked at Gloria, who was wearing a veil over her head. This person who didn't even dare to show her face was actually a candidate for family Morton's successor, just like their father. In other words, Cyril's original status as the sole successor was no longer valid. Family Morton might even be led by Gloria one day. That's great. Gloria clenched her fists tightly. She was so excited that she almost jumped up. Mickey and Deborah also looked at Gloria in disbelief. Father, I object to this matter. At this moment, Lance suddenly stood up. He looked at Jeffrey with a solemn expression and said, Father, no matter how dissatisfied you are with me, I was the one who made the decision back then. It has nothing to do with Gloria. I hope you won't vent your anger on Gloria. She's just a child. I object as well. Father, you said that I was a woman and had no right to inherit family Morton. But why did you choose Gloria as your successor? I'm your daughter. How am I inferior to a little girl like her? What right does she have to be the successor of family Morton? Aurora also rose to her feet as she looked at Jeffrey with an agitated expression. A hint of color had returned to her pale face, and her bony hands were tightly clenched into fists, giving her the appearance of an enraged lioness. Don't you have any idea why you don't have the right? Jeffrey looked up at Aurora. He didn't hide his disgust at all. Aurora met Jeffrey's gaze. She felt like a maggot that was suddenly exposed to the sun. She lowered her head in fear. She didn't know where her courage came from, but it was all gone. She sat back down dejectedly and looked at Gloria with a venomous gaze. Do you think I'm someone who would vent my anger on the younger generation? Have I ever done that in the past 20 years? Jeffrey's gaze fell on Lance. His gaze was also stern and interrogative. No. Lance shook his head. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. His father was such a proud person. He didn't do anything to him even after he revoked his right to inherit the family more than 20 years ago. It was impossible for him to do anything to the younger generation. But Gloria is still a child. How can she bear this kind of responsibility? How can she be willing to do something like this? A girl should have something she wants to do and something she's more suited for. She shouldn't take on such a heavy responsibility. Lance still shook his head. He didn't understand why Jeffrey would make such a decision. Sister. Mickey looked at Gloria with a worried expression. Father, this is my own choice. Right at this moment, Gloria stood up and looked at Lance, who had turned around with a surprised expression. She said earnestly, Father, you said that everyone has the right to choose, including women. I want to become an excellent businesswoman and the successor of family Morton. This is my choice. Cyril looked up at Gloria with surprise and anger in his eyes. He had thought that Jeffrey had pushed Gloria out of anger to make him nervous. However, it seemed that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Gloria had planned this all along. Gloria, you have to know that if you become the successor of a large family, you will lose a lot of freedom. You won't even be able to decide what you want to do most of the time. This is very unfair to you. Lance looked at Gloria with relief and concern. Father, making this choice is a kind of freedom in itself, isn't it? Gloria looked at Lance with a smile. Lance was stunned for a moment before a gratified smile appeared on his face. He nodded and said, Yes, since this is your choice, I should respect it. I shouldn't let you accommodate my expectations. Thank you, Father. Gloria smiled. I'm sorry, Father. Thank you for respecting Gloria's choice. Lance bowed solemnly to Jeffrey with gratitude. Chapter 372. Thank you, Grandfather. Gloria extended a grateful bow before returning to her seat with an elated expression beneath her black veil hat. Cyril's dejected expression immediately lit up upon hearing this, and a hint of elation flashed through his eyes as he turned to Gloria with a faint smile on his face. It seems that father has never thought of handing over the Morton family to a woman. Cyril's heart settled slightly with that thought. The Blue Suede Textiles shop was the first shop that family Morton had established, and it had been open for several decades in the Aden Square. However, The current value of this textiles shop was only to commemorate the history of the family Morton. Among the countless businesses that the family Morton owned, this was one of the most inconspicuous shops. Due to poor management, it had been operating at a loss for the past 2 years, and it had only been open at Geoffrey's request. Now that Geoffrey had entrusted Gloria with the responsibility of managing this textiles shop, there was no way that a little girl like her would be able to turn the tables around. She was most likely going to waste a few years there, but she still wouldn't be able to do anything. "You're so awesome, big sister. Are you the boss now?" Mickey turned to Gloria with reverence in his eyes as he spoke in a quiet voice. "Sure, let's eat," Gloria said in a quiet voice, but her voice was filled with elation. "Our little girl really has grown up. She dares to speak to grandfather like that. She's just like her father." Deborah turned to Gloria with elation in her eyes. "It's a difficult beginning, but it's at least a beginning. If I can feel some happiness in this place, then that's good too." Lance picked up his knife and fork. He was aware of the situation with the suede textiles shop, but he was very surprised that Geoffrey had made such a decision. Regardless of whether this was a test or a candidate that was destined to fail from the very beginning, as long as Gloria was happy, then that was all that mattered. "President, this is the information provided by the think tank regarding the Catering Association incident and the Bastille prison incident. Please take a look and see if we should act according to the results of the discussion." Menard, who replaced Mars as the new Secretary General, gently placed 2 documents in front of Geoffrey, who was sitting behind his desk. "Read it to me." Geoffrey leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He couldn't hide the exhaustion on his face. "Yes." Menard hurriedly picked up the documents again, and then read out the 2 reference opinions. "Let's do as they say. Our Chamber of Commerce can't take responsibility for this, nor can our members. Seeing as Warren and the other vice presidents have already been arrested, we'll let them take responsibility for this as well." Geoffrey opened his eyes and took a glance at the second document in Menard's hand. A hint of mockery appeared on his face as he said, "We've spent so much money on these guys, but sometimes, their suggestions are completely unreliable. The Aden Chamber of Commerce does indeed have the power to go toe-to-toe with any power in Chaos City, but arm wrestling is a very strenuous job, and there's a good chance that they'll be injured. If they lose, they'll lose face, and if they win, they'll incur an irreconcilable feud. The Bastille prison is backed by the City Lord's Castle and the Grey Temple. If we offend both of them at the same time, we'll have nowhere to go in Chaos City." Menard turned to Geoffrey with a perplexed expression, and asked, "How should we handle this, President?" "Cooperate with the Bastille prison's investigation, and give them all of the information we have on Goodnia and Ward. As for the infiltration, we'll return the responsibility to them as well. Separate the Aden Chamber of Commerce from this matter, and make Cyril spit out all of the money he's taken from us. After that, send all of it back," Geoffrey said in a calm voice. "But according to the analysis of the think tank, if the Chamber of Commerce is unable to protect its members and board members, then it'll have a negative impact on the cohesion of the Chamber of Commerce. In fact, some members may even side with the Buffett family," Menard said in a concerned manner. I never said that the Aden Chamber of Commerce is anyone's protection, nor will it tolerate those who break the rules. Humans should learn to be fearful and learn to use the rules instead of thinking about how to change the rules. If that little girl from the Buffett family dares to take in those bastards, she won't have the right to challenge me." Geoffrey chuckled coldly. "Yes." Menard's expression changed slightly as he lowered his head in response. He picked up the documents and quickly strode out of the room. The Aden Chamber of Commerce had faced countless challenges and threats in the past, and Geoffrey had always displayed his unique foresight and methods to save the Chamber of Commerce from peril and carve out a place for itself on the Norland continent. He was a man who had stood at the pinnacle of the business world in Chaos City, and even on the entire continent, for several decades. If the battle between Morton and Buffett becomes a battle between 2 women, then that's going to be a little boring. "Cyril, I hope you won't disappoint me again." Geoffrey tapped his knuckles lightly on the table as he looked out the window and fell into deep thought. "From today onward, Robert will be your new president. He'll take over all of Warren's duties, and reorganize the Catering Association to establish a more fair and transparent new catering association. The City Lord's Castle will take this very seriously, and will assist in the establishment of a third-party monitoring organization. I hope the Catering Association can become the true guiding light of Chaos City's food industry. In the conference room of the Catering Association, the official representing the City Lord's Castle announced the inauguration of the new president, and shook hands with Robert, who was standing off to the side. Everything is for good food. All I want is for all of you to continue to work toward this goal with me. I want all of you to be able to look at the words on the door with your heads held high every day. Robert looked at everyone below the stage with an earnest expression. A burst of applause rang out below the stage, but everyone wore different expressions on their faces. That's great. Vice President Robert has become the president. It won't be long before the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings Board will be revered by all of our customers. Luther clenched his fists with undisguised excitement on his face. Indeed. I didn't think that the president and vice president would all be arrested overnight. The Catering Association can finally see hope of being welcomed again. Alvin nodded in agreement, and was also very excited. In that case, we're going to undergo a massive transformation, right? Are we going to lose our jobs because of this? Also, won't the president's actions implicate us as well? A lot of City Lord's Castle guards came this morning, and all of our information has been sealed up. After so many years, who doesn't have their own shortcomings? Most of them were panicking and concerned. Chapter 373. Did you hear? Something big seems to have happened at the Catering Association today. I saw a bunch of guards from the City Lord's Castle going in and out of the Catering Association building this morning. Even the main gate seems to have been locked down. I saw that too, but everything seemed to have returned to normal in the afternoon. Could it be that even the City Lord's Castle can't stand idly by and is going to stand up for Mammoths? If you ask me, they should have investigated this a long time ago. I haven't looked at the Aiden Square food rankings for the past 2 years. Every time I try it, I'll be disappointed. It's basically a blind ranking. The customers lining up in front of Mammoths were discussing among themselves, and many of them were also paying attention to the Catering Association. Could it be that the City Lord liked the grilled fish after tasting it, so he decided to do something about the Catering Association? But I didn't say anything that night. Meg had also heard some rumors. Even though he didn't know exactly what was going on, he was still quite happy to hear that the Catering Association was in trouble. However, Mag knew that unless the City Lord was determined to destroy the city, the Catering Association would at most be given a warning, and there wouldn't be any major changes to the organization. As for whether Mammoths would be able to make it onto the rankings, Meg didn't hold out much hope. After all, if something big really did happen, no one would go out of their way to put Mammoths back on the rankings, right? Meg wasn't narcissistic enough to think that the entire world was paying attention to him. Yarbemia stood at the entrance of the kitchen with anticipation in her eyes as she looked at Meg, who was cooking some sauce, and asked, "Boss, are we having grilled fish tonight?" "Yes, we're having grilled fish tonight. It's medium spicy." Meg nodded with a smile. He wanted to try the super spicy grilled fish, but he was worried that Sally wouldn't be able to handle it. The medium spicy grilled fish was also quite delicious, so he decided to go with the medium spicy grilled fish. Huh! Why are there so many people lining up? Vivian looked at the 2 long lines in front of Mammoths with a hint of surprise on her face. Today, she had changed into a loose, dark blue robe. She was a little embarrassed when her bra strap was torn the last time, but in order to prevent the same thing from happening again, she had already made all the necessary preparations. She was going to order a super spicy grilled fish. With so many people lining up, when will it be my turn? I personally pleaded for your restaurant in front of my father. Those fatties have all been arrested, and I still have to line up here. Before they knew it, Vivian had already reached the end of the line, and she pursed her lips as she said, "So be it, I'll just have to line up for the sake of the spicy grilled fish. Otherwise, I wouldn't stand behind so many people." Last night, she finally had a good sleep. This morning, she woke up naturally at 9 o'clock. This feeling was really amazing. She couldn't remember how many years it had been since she slept so well and woke up naturally instead of being woken up by pain. However, all of this was because she had eaten a spicy grilled fish, so she had changed her attire and come here to eat again. However, this time, she exited through the back door without climbing over the wall. I can't. It can't be eaten. I really can't eat it today. Not far away, Sconard was shaking his head as he involuntarily made his way toward Amy's. However, his gait was a little strange. His legs were swung out like a crab, and he wore a reluctant expression on his face. Stop. Stop right now. If I eat it again today, my ass is really going to explode. No. Insanely spicy. I can't mess with it. I can't mess with it. Sconard's footsteps abruptly faltered, and he turned around with a pained expression. However, he only took a few steps before turning back again. He looked at the restaurant's signboard with a conflicted expression, and gritted his teeth as he made his way back to the end of the line. Screw it. If I don't eat such a delicious grilled fish, I'm definitely going to die today. As long as I don't order the insanely spicy grilled fish, there shouldn't be any problems, right? It's this guy again. Has he been stalking me every day? Father gave me permission to go out today. If this guy wants to use this to threaten me, then don't blame me for not holding back. It's been a few years since I last wielded a sword, but I should be able to take care of a freak like him. A hint of disgust flashed through Vivian's eyes at the sight of Sconard's strange gait. She clenched her fists tightly, preparing to attack at a moment's notice. Many of the customers at the restaurant last night still remembered this young man who had threatened to reserve the entire restaurant and ordered an insanely spicy grilled fish in the end. All of them had peculiar expressions on their faces when they saw the way he was walking. As expected, it was best not to try insanely spicy grilled fish so easily. Sconard was a little distracted today. His mind was filled with thoughts of the spicy grilled fish, and he was at the end of the line, so he didn't notice Vivian, who had changed into a blue dress. What the hell? He's not even looking at me. Vivian was a little disappointed, but she wasn't going to provoke Sconard. Instead, she looked around in a bored manner, curious as to why there were two lines in this restaurant. Thus, she turned to the elderly man at the front of the line and asked, "Looks like this is your first time eating at Amy's, right?" The elderly man was quite benevolent, and he smiled as he said, "If you want to tell me why there are two lines in this restaurant, I'll have to start with the delicacy known as tofu pudding." Vivian listened with a surprised expression as the elderly man recounted how two magic casters had engaged in a heated battle in front of the restaurant over a bowl of tofu pudding, and how the sweet and savory factions had been established. Ever since then, there had been two lines in front of the restaurant. Is this tofu pudding really that good? Vivian was a little skeptical. She seemed to have ordered a tofu pudding last time, but the fish was too big, so she had to cancel, so she didn't get to taste it. However, this elderly man's words had piqued her curiosity. Of course. Let me tell you, this savory tofu pudding is very refreshing and delicious. Have a bowl before your meal, and it's definitely a top-grade dish that you can't miss out on. The elderly man nodded with a strong recommendation. Don't listen to him, brother. The sweet tofu pudding is sweet, but it's not greasy, and you'll be completely satisfied if you have a bowl after your meal. It's definitely worth a try, a middle-aged man in the line said with a serious expression. Then, I can have a bowl of both. That way, I'll know which one tastes better, Vivian said in a matter-of-fact manner. That's only if Mr. Mack is willing to sell you a second bowl. The two men rolled their eyes in unison, and didn't say anything further. It's not like I don't have money, why wouldn't he sell it to me? Vivian pursed her lips, but she wasn't worried in the slightest. Chapter 374. System: Can the consumption of strength points be used to upgrade the restaurant? Meg asked directly in his mind. Yes, as long as it's not for the purchase of food ingredients, it can be used to upgrade the level of the restaurant. Host: What are you waiting for? With less than 40,000 gold coins, you can upgrade the restaurant to LV2. More privileges and benefits are waiting for you, the system's excited voice sounded. Meg felt as if it was going to jump out of his mind and drag him to upgrade. Don't worry, I haven't decided when to upgrade yet. Why don't we discuss the benefits first? Can the failure rate of the mission this afternoon be removed? Meg asked calmly. No. The system said firmly. It had no intention of negotiating. Then I won't upgrade, Meg said decisively. An ellipsis appeared in the system's mind. It said in exasperation, Host, you can't be a bachelor. I've always been a bachelor. Meg smiled. But you have a daughter, and you have a mother in name, the system retorted. The mother is the mother, but I don't even know what she looks like. Why don't you help me recover the fragmented memories in my mind? Then I can reluctantly admit that I'm half a bachelor, Meg said with a smile. No, I can't do that. The system rejected decisively. Then there's no other way. I'll give you some time to consider. I think the restaurant is pretty good now. It doesn't matter if it's upgraded or not. Earning $1 million a day is the pinnacle of life. Meg looked indifferent. Actually, he wanted to upgrade, but the system was obviously more anxious. If he didn't get some benefits, he would be letting himself down. Mr. Mack, your restaurant's business is so good. Why don't you expand the shop? Aren't the shops next to them all empty? That way, everyone will have a seat, and it will be more comfortable to sit and wait for the dishes, Harrison suggested to Mag when he walked in. Okay, I'll think about it. Meg nodded with a smile. It was not up to him to decide whether to expand or not. It was up to the system to decide. Otherwise, it would be difficult to solve the problem of unifying the decoration style. The customers all came in, and Vivian couldn't help but take a few more glances at Mag when she walked past him. The dishes are so delicious and have such a magical effect. He's actually 70 to 80% as handsome as me. It's really rare. Vivian thought to herself as she stroked her mustache in a narcissistic manner before entering the room. Meg also noticed Vivian's gaze and actions. He raised an eyebrow. This girl was really interesting. He wondered which family she was from. After that, Meg noticed that Sconard was walking in a rather strange manner, and he asked in a concerned manner, Are you all right? What can happen to me? Sconard forced a nonchalant expression onto his face as he stood up a little straighter, and he immediately felt his butt tighten. However, he had just embarrassed himself in front of Meg the day before, so he definitely couldn't back down today. That's good to hear. How about another insanely spicy dish today? You were the only one who ordered the insanely spicy dish yesterday. As expected of a true warrior, Meg said with a smile. Sconard swallowed involuntarily as he looked at the smile on Meg's face. He was suddenly struck by the urge to beat someone up, but he couldn't move at the moment, and the spicy grilled fish was simply too delicious, so he could only repress the urge to do so. All of the customers turned to look at Sconard upon hearing that. There really weren't many people who could earn the admiration of Mr. Mack. Hey, aren't you the smoking red-haired lion brother? You're so awesome. You can eat the insanely spicy dish. You really look like a freak when you have smoke coming out of your head. Amy clapped her hands with admiration as she held Ugly Duckling in her arms. Sconard's expression twisted upon hearing that. He didn't know what expression to use in the face of such praise. However, all of the customers were looking at him with admiration in their eyes, and the adorable half-elf girl standing before him was looking at him with admiration. If you're a man, then eat the insanely spicy dish. Sconard felt as if he could hear a voice in his head. This voice made his blood rush to his head, and he clenched his fists as he said, I'll have a spicy grilled fish. The insanely spicy dish. Are you sure your body is fine? How about we order a mildly spicy dish? Meg asked with a concerned expression. My body is perfectly fine. I want the insanely spicy dish. Spicy. Spicy. It's spicy. Sconard looked at Mag with an extremely resolute expression. All right. Meg looked at Sconard, who was determined to kill him if he didn't give him the insanely spicy dish, and he turned to walk toward the kitchen. He couldn't afford to piss off Sconard. Young people nowadays were all incredible. Holy fuck. Why did I order the insanely spicy dish again? No. I'm going to die if I keep eating like this. I have to cancel it. Sconard looked at Meg's departing figure, and he suddenly came to his senses as his expression fell. Smoking red lion brother is so awesome. You ordered another insanely spicy dish. You must be a real freak, right? Amy looked up at Sconard, and her eyes lit up as she thought to herself. Then I'll call you Smoking Red Lion Brother from now on. Whatever, as long as you're happy. Sconard looked at Amy in a feeble voice. He suddenly realized why he had ordered another insanely spicy grilled fish. Part of the reason was that he had been provoked by Meg, but the main reason was that he had been praised by this little guy. This little guy was simply too adorable, and a casual compliment was enough to make him swollen with pride. After that, he ordered another insanely spicy grilled fish. I hope the sun will rise again tomorrow. Sconard heaved an internal sigh as he walked into the restaurant with a solemn expression. I'd like a savory tofu pudding, and then a super spicy grilled fish. After I finish the grilled fish, I'd like a sweet tofu pudding for dessert. Vivian sat down at a table, and immediately ordered as she looked at Yarbemia. My apologies, but each person can only order one tofu pudding per meal. Yarbemia shook his head. I'll pay for it, or I can pay in advance. Just order it for me, Vivian replied without any hesitation. My apologies, but this is a restaurant rule. Each customer can only order one tofu pudding per meal. Yarbemia shook his head again. Chapter 375. Yarbemia shook his head again, and said, I'm sorry, but I can't even pay more. That's the restaurant's rule. See, even if you want a bowl of each flavor, Mr. Mac won't sell it to you. How about a savory tofu pudding? The elderly man from before said with a smile as he scooped up a spoonful of the savory tofu pudding. His eyes narrowed as an elated expression appeared on his face. Ara. I'm so mad. I'm not eating anymore. Vivian's eyes widened as she thought to herself. However, at the sight of Yarbemia's vibrant smile and the aroma of the tofu pudding and grilled fish wafting through the air, she couldn't help but swallow involuntarily. She took a deep breath as she looked at Yarbemia, and said, Then I'll have a savory tofu pudding and a super spicy grilled fish. Sure, please wait a moment. Yarbemia nodded with a smile before turning to leave. If it weren't for the fact that I have a good temper, I would've. Vivian looked at the spicy grilled fish on the table next to hers, and swallowed her words as she swallowed them back down. Boss, we've reaped a lot of rewards today. At this rate, it won't be long before we have enough Rugiamos for this year's winter. That's right. A bronze boar, 2 blue-eyed winged snakes, and a saw-toothed tiger. That's enough for us to eat for many days. Outside the restaurant, Mond and Keel were looking at Sargeras with excitement on their faces. There were a few small cuts on their faces, but they didn't appear to be in any serious condition. That's right. After eating this Rugiamo, my powers are improving at an incredible rate. I feel like I'll be able to make another breakthrough in no time. Kossus, Markza, and Karzak were also very excited. Ever since they had eaten Rugiamos had been the only thing on their minds every day. Fight for Rugiamos. Do missions for Rugiamos. Only by eating more Rugiamos could they become more powerful. This was a way to improve their powers, and they were very excited. Winter is coming soon. It's getting colder earlier than usual this year. This winter may be longer and more difficult. We have to prepare more Rugiamos. Sargeras shook his head, and solemnly said, Moreover, our third batch of lava warriors is about to arrive. We have to be prepared. Once the weather turns cold, it will be harder and harder to find prey. Hearing this, the expressions of all the demons became solemn. For the tribe. For Rugiamo. Work hard, lava warriors. Sargeras raised the folding chair in his hand toward the sky, and shouted loudly. For Rugiamo. All the demons shouted in unison, their morale rising once more. These demons are really a little cute. Hearing that, the customers all looked out of the restaurant. Many of them smiled kindly. These lava demons who came to eat Rugiamos every day behaved more like a group of gentlemen. They obeyed the rules of the restaurant and even helped to maintain order in the restaurant. In order not to disturb other customers, they took the initiative to eat outside the restaurant, which made many customers have a good impression of them. Rugiamo? Did these lava demons go crazy over Rugiamo? Vivian looked back at the door with a surprised expression. She then flipped open the menu, wondering just what kind of delicious Rugiamo was. No matter what it is, it definitely won't be as good as my spicy grilled fish. I can eat such delicious grilled fish for the rest of my life. Yesterday's medium spicy grilled fish was very satisfying. I wonder what the super spicy grilled fish will taste like. I'm really looking forward to it. Vivian looked toward the kitchen with an expectant expression. Hello, here's your savory tofu pudding, Yarbemia said with a smile as she placed a bowl of savory tofu pudding in front of Yarbemia. All right, thank you. Vivian nodded, but her attention was already drawn to the tofu pudding in front of her. The orange sauce was poured over the tender white tofu pudding, and the pickled mustard was minced. Then, coriander, garlic, chopped green onions, and 2 drops of sesame oil were sprinkled over the tofu pudding. The tofu pudding was still steaming hot, and a sweet bean aroma wafted over. Gulp. Vivian swallowed involuntarily, but she quickly realized that she had lost her composure. She cleared her throat and sat up straighter as she said, I actually only wanted to eat the spicy grilled fish, but seeing as the grilled fish isn't ready yet, I'll have to try this first. However, I still think the spicy grilled fish is the best. Yarbemia merely smiled and didn't say anything. She discovered that this young man was quite interesting. He was talking to himself from time to time, but he seemed to have a good personality and wasn't an unreasonable person. Vivian picked up a spoon and gently scooped up a spoonful of tofu pudding. The spoon sliced through the tofu pudding as if it were slicing through water, and a hint of tender white was revealed beneath the orange sauce. As the spoon drew closer, the aroma of the tofu pudding became even more pronounced, and Yarbemia's eyes also lit up. Due to her poor health, her daily diet was very bland. As such, whenever she snuck out of the house, she liked to find some food with strong flavors to give her taste buds a taste. However, even though this tofu pudding was bland, it struck her with the urge to devour it. The tofu pudding slid down his tongue, and the savory sauce and sweet tofu pudding melted in his mouth. The flavors of the side dishes also blossomed in his mouth, creating a refreshing and delicious combination. After swallowing, the faint fragrance of beans lingered in his mouth for a long time. It's so delicious. What is this? How can it be so smooth and tender? It's not made from water, but it melts at the slightest touch. There's also a hint of freshness in it. It's the aroma of shrimp. Even those tiny shrimp are exuding such a delicious aroma. Even the taste of the most common pickled vegetables seems to be different from other vegetables. The savory flavor is just right, and it's refreshing without being greasy. Vivian stared at the tofu pudding before her with incredulity in her eyes. This was a completely different flavor from the spicy grilled fish, but it was just as intoxicating. How could one mouthful be enough? Such delicious food was so delicious that she couldn't stop eating. Vivian continued to feed herself spoonful after spoonful of tofu pudding, and a joyful smile appeared on her face as she savored the delicious flavor spreading throughout her mouth. The spicy grilled fish is the best. But the tofu pudding is also delicious. It's so delicious. Vivian had already completely forgotten what she had just said, and her mind was completely preoccupied with the tofu pudding. The savory tofu pudding really is the most delicious. The elderly man from before nodded with satisfaction before reluctantly placing the final spoonful of tofu pudding into his mouth. He savored the taste for a while before swallowing. The flavor is quite average, but seeing as the spicy grilled fish isn't ready yet, I'll have another savory tofu pudding. Vivian put down the bowl that she had licked clean and turned to Yarbemia. Even though her expression was calm and collected, the tips of her ears were a little red. Chapter 376. Even if I leave right now and never come back, you still won't sell me another bowl of savory tofu pudding? Vivian looked at Yarbemia with a serious expression. You can't leave, Big Brother Mustache, Amy said with a serious expression. Why? What if I insist on leaving? Are you worried that if I don't come back again, the restaurant's business will take a hit? Vivian looked at Amy with a smile. She suddenly felt like she had grasped the crux of the matter. No, if you want to leave, then you have to pay for the tofu pudding first. It'll be 200 copper coins. Amy shook her head as she extended her little hand toward Vivian. Vivian's smile immediately stiffened. She looked at Amy with a serious expression, and she suddenly realized that she had completely underestimated this little girl. Don't you have any money with you? You can't do that. Our restaurant only accepts cash, so you can leave after you pay. Amy looked at Vivian with a perplexed expression. Should I leave or not? Vivian was immediately conflicted. She had wanted to scare Yarbemia into giving her another bowl of savory tofu pudding, but this little girl wasn't scared at all. Instead, she wanted to take her money and leave. Yarbemia looked at Vivian with a smile. She wasn't worried that Vivian wouldn't pay. After all, she could tell from his attire that he definitely wasn't short on money, and he had already paid for the grilled fish the day before. But she couldn't break the rule of only one serving of tofu pudding per person, so if he insisted on having a second serving of tofu pudding, she could only do as REMI said and pay the bill and leave. No. I'm so angry, but if I miss out on this delicious spicy grilled fish, I'll have to wait until tomorrow to eat it again, and I won't be able to sleep well tonight. Hence, I have to eat this grilled fish. I'll take this lying down. Vivian looked at Yarbemia, who had no intention of changing her mind, and then at Amy, who had reached out her hand with an innocent look on her face. She took a deep breath, crossed her arms, and said coolly, I actually want to leave, but the grilled fish is almost ready, right? If I leave now, it'll be a waste. I really can't do something like that, so I can only eat the grilled fish before I leave. I've already had enough tofu pudding, so I don't want another helping. All right, please wait for a moment. Yarbemia smiled and went into the kitchen. Big Brother Mustache, you actually want to eat the spicy grilled fish, right? I can see it in your eyes. Amy also withdrew her hand and looked at Vivian with a smile. Who said so? How could this be? It doesn't exist. Vivian waved her hand with a guilty conscience. She looked at Amy, who was wearing a little magician robe, and inched closer as she said, also, little girl, why are you calling me Big Brother Mustache? That's such a horrible nickname. Just call me Invincible Most Handsome Big Brother on the continent from now on. I like that nickname. But I don't like it. I like to call you Big Brother Mustache. Amy shook her head before pointing at the kitchen with a proud expression as she said, besides, Big Brother Invincible Most Handsome Big Brother on the continent is my father, not you. Vivian glanced at Meg in the kitchen, and she was speechless. This little girl really wasn't holding back at all. However, he really didn't know how to respond to that. For some reason, he was struck by how adorable Amy's serious expression was. All right, do as you wish. Vivian glanced at Sconard, who was waiting for the insanely spicy grilled fish in a daze. Compared to his stinky nickname, hers was already a very friendly one. All right, Big Brother Mustache. Amy nodded before squatting down to rub Ugly Duckling's head against her leg, and picking it up to play with. I wanted to tell you about the latest news from the Catering Association, but seeing as you want to compete with me for the title of Invincible Most Handsome Big Brother on the continent, I won't tell you. Vivian harumphed as she looked toward the kitchen. She propped up her chin with one hand and looked on with a bored expression as Amy played with Ugly Duckling. One dish after another was brought out of the kitchen. Even though Meg was the only one in the kitchen, the speed at which the dishes were served was even faster than that of many large restaurants. All of the customers began to enjoy the delicious food, and a joyful atmosphere spread throughout the restaurant. We want 30 Ruggiamos, Sargeras said in a heroic manner. Sargeras said proudly the moment he entered the restaurant. He stood at the entrance of the restaurant and saw that his usual seat was already taken, so he stood at the door with the chair in his hand, and didn't walk in. Sir, there should be a seat available soon, Yarbemia said with a smile. During this period of time, she had become quite familiar with this demon who ordered dozens of Ruggiamos every day. Sargeras shook his head with a bashful smile, and said, no need, we'll just eat at the entrance. My brothers have been fighting all day, and they're all hungry. If it's possible, let's give them the best Ruggiamos as a reward right now. All right, please wait a moment. Yarbemia nodded with a smile before quickly walking toward the kitchen. Boss, I think we can put some tables and chairs outside the restaurant. That way, the customers who can't eat in the restaurant will have a place to sit, Mia said as she put Ruggiamo on a tray in the kitchen. That's a good idea. But we can't do that in the Aiden Square, right? Meg said with a smile. An outdoor restaurant was a good idea, but he wasn't sure if it would work. Yarbemia nodded with pity, and said, "All right, but I don't think it's a good idea for those lava demons to eat at the entrance every time. After all, they're already very tired when they come to eat, and they still have to stand." That's indeed a problem. Mag also glanced at the door upon hearing that. A few lava demons were standing outside the floor-to-ceiling windows and looking into the restaurant. All of them had some injuries on their bodies, and it seemed like they had just returned from the wilderness. Eating dozens of Ruggiamos every day was a lot of pressure for them. They had to do many mercenary missions to earn enough money to buy Ruggiamos. If they could sit down and enjoy the delicious food, it would be a good consolation for them after a hard day's work. Ding-ling. Chapter 377. What is she doing here? Meg's eyes widened at the sight of the woman who had just entered the restaurant. She appeared to be around 20 years of age, and was extremely beautiful. Her skin was as fair as snow, but her expression and disposition were extremely cold. Wasn't she the frost dragon that he had encountered at the gates of Chaos City? Meg had an extremely good memory, but he had only taken an extra glance at her in the crowd at the gates of Chaos City, so there shouldn't be any grudges between them. Furthermore, both Crassus and Julian were in the restaurant, so he didn't have to worry about her causing trouble. He was just curious as to why an otherworldly celestial maiden like her would come to the restaurant. Could it be that she was here to eat? Elizabeth's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of the bustling restaurant. There were all types of strange smells in the air, and a hint of displeasure appeared on her face. She didn't like human food, and she didn't like all kinds of strange condiments in her food. It made her feel as if she had eaten something strange. She had come here today for the half-dragon girl that she had seen the other day. She had gone to some places during the past few days, and had taken care of some people who were following her. Even though the matter hadn't been completely resolved yet, at least she didn't have to worry about being followed. Hence, she had come here today to confirm whether that was the half-dragon girl she was looking for. "Welcome." Yarbemia made her way over to Elizabeth with a smile, and her eyes lit up as she looked at her. Her mouth gaped open slightly, and she immediately fell silent. What a beautiful girl. She's like a goddess, and why do I sense a familiar aura from her body? It's like a mother's. Yarbemia was a little perplexed as she stared at Elizabeth. She is indeed a half-dragon girl, but why is her bloodline so strange? She has a pair of eyes of different colors. If she were a golden dragon, then both of her eyes should be golden. There's no way that a human bloodline can rival a golden dragon's bloodline. That's only possible in low-tier dragons. Elizabeth was also sizing up Yarbemia. Her deep blue eyes were filled with confusion. She could sense a familiar aura from Yarbemia, but this was her first time coming into contact with a half-dragon. She wasn't sure if it was due to the dragon aura or bloodline. Elizabeth stood at the door with her hands hanging by her sides. Yarbemia, who was holding the tray in her arms, stood with her left leg in front of her. The two of them stood facing each other as if they were frozen in place. A cold aura spread from the entrance of the restaurant to the entire restaurant, causing many customers to shiver and look towards the entrance of the restaurant. What a beautiful girl. This was the thought that arose in many people's hearts. The ice beauty was indeed pleasing to the eyes. However, this kind of coldness was not just something that looked cold. It was truly cold. This cold aura isn't magic. Could it be a frost dragon? Sargeras, who was standing beside the door, looked at Elizabeth with a hint of surprise. As a lava demon, he was more sensitive to ice. He tightened his grip on the foldable chair, and took a small step toward Yarbemia as if he were ready to attack at any moment. Outside the restaurant, the lava demons also showed some vigilance. They had an innate hostility toward icy cold. A little fellow from the Frost Dragon clan? Julian, who was sweating profusely from the grilled fish, turned to look at Elizabeth with a hint of surprise on his face. Why does this girl look a little like that unreliable guy? I think he does have a daughter who's about this age. However, there hasn't been any news of that guy for many years. But he's been hunted down by so many people, so he must have gone into hiding. Isn't it nice to have a warm meal? Crassus raised an eyebrow. The cold aura around him dissipated, and warmth spread in all directions. The temperature in the restaurant returned to normal. Crassus, the god of fire. Elizabeth immediately withdrew her gaze from Yarbemia, and looked at Crassus, who was sitting with his back facing the entrance of the restaurant. Her expression changed slightly, and she hesitated for a moment before withdrawing the cold aura around her. She then turned to Sargeras with a hint of wariness in her eyes. Dragon Island and the Undead Islands were neighbors. Even though there was a boundless sea between them, there were still frequent conflicts between the two sides. During the war between species, there were also countless battles between the two sides. Due to the fact that the frost dragons and lava demons were of opposing attributes, there were many conflicts between them. Back then, the lava demons were one of the top 10 demon tribes. They had countless powerful beings, and were able to rival the frost dragons. However, with the decline of the lava demons, the frost dragons continued to occupy the upper echelons of the dragon race. The two sides were no longer on the same level as each other. However, the rapid decline of the lava demons back then was related to the frost dragons. The feud between the two sides was still unresolved even now. However, the lava demons no longer had the ability to challenge the frost dragons, and the frost dragons wouldn't stoop so low as to challenge a declining tribe that didn't even have a powerful being. However, the lava demon in front of her made Elizabeth feel threatened. Although he didn't show any obvious hostility, she wasn't sure if she could defeat him in a real battle. Could it be that the lava demons are starting to rise again? Elizabeth turned to look at the entrance. There were a few lava demons outside, and they were even more powerful than the lava demons that she had heard about. Hello, sir. There are many customers in the restaurant now. If you want to eat, you may have to wait for a while. Yarbemia also recovered from the shock, and hurriedly said with a blush on her face. She didn't expect that she would be so engrossed in looking at a lady. She looked a little embarrassed. Yes. Elizabeth looked at Yarbemia, and hesitated momentarily before nodding. She didn't like the mixed auras in the restaurant, but she still wanted to confirm Yarbemia's identity. There were many half-dragons in Chaos City, but it would be very difficult to find a half-dragon of the right age and bloodline. Furthermore, she couldn't be too conspicuous. If Fox were to find out, she could be in danger. Before she truly awakened her dragon bloodline, she was no different from a normal human. A frost dragon, huh? There seems to be more dragons coming to Chaos City recently. Could it be that the negotiations between the demons and the dragons are about to begin? But this girl really is beautiful, and her cold temperament is amazing. Next time, I have to bring Luna to see her. Vivian was also a little surprised to see Elizabeth, and her eyes were filled with amazement. Chapter 378. Not long after that, Yarbemia made her way over to Elizabeth, and said, "Hello, there's a seat over there. You can take a seat there. I don't like to sit with others." Elizabeth's brows furrowed slightly as she looked at the seat that Yarbemia was pointing at. There were 3 people at the table, 2 tall and burly orcs munching on Ruggiamos, while a dwarf was eating spicy grilled fish. He was panting heavily with sweat pouring down his face. "My apologies, but our restaurant has to share tables when there are a lot of customers, so we don't prepare individual tables for our customers. If you don't mind, perhaps you can wait for a while longer, and I'll arrange a more suitable seat for you." Yarbemia could tell what Elizabeth was thinking, and hurriedly offered an explanation. In her eyes, all customers were the same, but it didn't seem appropriate for Elizabeth to share a table with them. "All right." Elizabeth was already preparing to leave, but she hesitated momentarily at the sight of Yarbemia's earnest expression, and nodded in the end. "You can sit over there, we just so happen to have another empty seat." Yarbemia looked around, and her eyes immediately lit up as her gaze fell on Vivian's table. The customer sitting across from Vivian had just paid his bill and left. Elizabeth took a glance at Vivian, and discovered that the man appeared to be a human, but he was quite clean. There were 2 elegant human women sitting at the same table with him, and she hesitated momentarily before making her way over to that table and taking a seat across from Vivian. Vivian was just about to try the spicy grilled fish that had just been served, and she turned to Elizabeth with a hint of surprise in her eyes. "This is the spicy grilled fish, and it's super delicious. Would you like to try it?" Having grown up in the Castellans mansion, she had seen countless powerhouses since she was young. She had even seen quite a number of level 10 dragons. Naturally, she would not be timid in front of Elizabeth. Moreover, she had a good impression of such a beautiful frost WM. "No, thanks." Elizabeth took a glance at the grilled fish in front of Vivian, and replied in a cold voice. At the same time, she turned to look at Vivian. Under normal circumstances, any man who dared to speak to her in such a manner would already be dead. "That's too bad." Vivian shrugged nonchalantly. She picked up her chopsticks, picked up a piece of tender fish, and slowly put it into her mouth. The spiciness of the fish was far more intense than last night, and her tongue and mouth were completely numbed in an instant. After that, she regained her senses, and the fragrant fish skin and tender fish meat melted in her mouth. Vivian couldn't help but close her eyes, but the scorching sensation in her throat made her want to scream. As expected, super spicy and medium spicy were completely different. She had never tasted anything as spicy as this before. If this wasn't the pinnacle of spiciness, then she couldn't imagine what the insanely spicy level was like. Stab stab, Vivian's expression changed slightly when she heard the sound of her clothes struggling, but she quickly relaxed again. She was wearing her loosest gown today, and she didn't wrap her clothes too tightly around her chest. Even though the spiciness level had increased, she didn't have to worry about her clothes bursting open. "It's so spicy that I want to scream, but it's simply too delicious." Vivian exhaled as she looked at the grilled fish before her with glowing eyes. She took one bite after another to suppress the spiciness in her mouth. A scorching sensation spread throughout her entire body, and a faint mist quickly rose up from her body. This was the glacial chi that had been forced out of her meridians. There was far less of it compared to the day before, but it was still very effective. "What's this?" Elizabeth looked at Vivian, who was quickly immersed in the spicy grilled fish and completely ignoring her. After staying in the restaurant for a while, she had already slowly grown accustomed to the aroma in the restaurant. Even though the aroma was still quite chaotic, she was surprised to find that it wasn't that bad. Instead, it was a little enticing. That's right, enticing. This was an aroma that she had never smelled before. She didn't know what kind of food was releasing this aroma, but this was the first time that she had discovered that food cooked by humans could be so enticing. In fact, she was even struck by the urge to salivate. The most pronounced aroma was most likely that of the grilled fish before her, which was covered in some unknown red sauce. The pungent spiciness displeased her, but the aroma imbued within it made her want to try it. "I didn't know that cooked fish would have such a fragrant aroma. It's completely different from eating it raw." Elizabeth thought to herself as she looked at Vivian, who was eating one spicy grilled fish after another with an elated expression on her face. She couldn't help but swallow involuntarily. It really did look delicious. "What would you like to order, dear customer?" Yarbemia made her way over to Vivian with a smile. She had a strange feeling toward Elizabeth, and this feeling was quite peculiar. She had never felt this way toward anyone else before, but she didn't know how to ask, so she could only keep it to herself. "I'll have this," Elizabeth said as she pointed at the grilled fish in front of Vivian. "Didn't you just say you didn't want it?" Vivian raised her head with a peculiar expression. She stuck out her tongue, feeling as if it didn't belong to her anymore. "I changed my mind," Elizabeth replied in a matter-of-fact manner. "You really aren't putting on an act at all." Vivian clicked her tongue. If she were in Elizabeth's shoes, she would definitely find an excuse to not feel so awkward. "Do you have a problem with that?" Elizabeth asked. "No." Vivian shook her head and continued to eat. "Dear customer, this is the spicy grilled fish. There are 4 flavors and 3 sizes. You can take a look at the menu before you make your choice. If you don't like spicy food, I suggest you order." Yarbemia pointed at the menu on the table. "Just like him," Elizabeth replied. "Dear customer, you ordered the super spicy grilled fish. Are you sure you want the super spicy grilled fish?" Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth with a serious expression. She could already handle spicy food, But the medium spicy grilled fish was already a little too much for her, so the super spicy grilled fish and the insanely spicy grilled fish must be even more extraordinary. Yes. Elizabeth nodded, and fell silent as she looked at the ring on her right thumb. All right, please wait a moment. Yarbemia nodded before turning and making her way to the kitchen. Dragons don't usually eat cooked food, right? If someone who's never had spicy food before tries the super spicy grilled fish, look at her clothes. Vivian glanced at Elizabeth with a hint of interest in her eyes. Not long after that, Elizabeth's grilled fish was also served. Elizabeth looked at the grilled fish that was covered in red chili, and picked up her chopsticks with an unaccustomed expression. She picked up a piece of fish that was covered in red sauce in a slightly clumsy manner, and placed it into her mouth. Many people in the restaurant turned toward her, and even Meg stopped what he was doing in the kitchen. He was curious to see how a giant dragon would react after eating the spicy grilled fish, especially an icy beauty like Elizabeth. What the hell is this? A numbing sensation instantly spread in her mouth, and while Elizabeth's fair and tender face flushed red. A stream of heat rapidly circulated in her body, as if countless hands were tickling her. What made her even more flustered was that the long dress made of ice and snow on her body was actually showing signs of bursting. Rip. Chapter 379. All of the customers in the restaurant turned their attention to Elizabeth, and all of their eyes lit up upon hearing the screeching sound. A bright silver light then lit up the restaurant, and a huge white snowflake appeared beneath Elizabeth's feet. The light then disappeared in a flash, and Elizabeth had already disappeared from her seat. Why did Big Sister suddenly disappear? Amy held Ugly Duckling in her arms with a surprised expression as she looked around with curiosity. Where did she go? Many customers in the restaurant looked at this scene in surprise, not knowing why Elizabeth suddenly disappeared. Did she teleport away? Meg was also a little surprised. He took a glance at the empty seat before continuing to cook. Her mastery of the ice and frost domain is quite good. Looks like she really is that guy's daughter. She's much prettier than her. Julian also didn't say anything. What a pity. She ran away. Vivian faltered slightly upon hearing this before murmuring to herself with a wistful expression. Countless people were thinking the exact same thing. In the air outside the restaurant, a white light flashed, and a frost dragon that was over 30 meters in length appeared. It then opened its mouth to expel a ball of flames, and let loose a deafening dragon's roar as the front half of its body turned red. Why is this frost dragon able to expel fireballs? It's so strange. What a beautiful frost dragon. But that woman just then disappeared after taking a bite of the grilled fish, and this frost dragon that's spewing fireballs suddenly appeared. Could it be that the woman just then was this frost dragon? I think that's most likely the case. Could it be that Mr. Max spiked the grilled fish? How did he force the frost dragon to reveal its true form? All of the customers couldn't help but discuss among themselves as they looked at the frost dragon in the air through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She transformed back into her dragon form. Thank God she can teleport. If she were to reveal her true form in the restaurant, the entire restaurant would be packed to the brim. Looks like I'll have to be more careful when dealing with dragon customers in the future. Meg was also slightly startled by the dragon's roar. A dragon that was over 30 meters in length was far too massive. What the hell is this? Why was it so irritating? If I hadn't teleported quickly enough, my clothes would have melted in an instant. What did that shop owner put in it? Humans are indeed a cunning race. You can't trust them, and you can't eat their food. Elizabeth thought angrily in mid-air. If it weren't for the presence of the fire god in the restaurant, she would have used magic to destroy the restaurant that almost embarrassed her. A fiery feeling burned in her body. Although most of it had been suppressed by the frost, there was still a wind surging in her blood. She could feel that some of the water in her body was slowly draining away, turning into mist and dissipating from her body. It was an indescribable feeling. After getting used to it, she even felt a little comfortable. But the taste of this fish is so delicious. There are no words to describe this flavor. It's sweeter and more fragrant than the best spirit fruits on the Dragon Island, and more delicious than the freshest arowana. The crispy fish skin is wrapped around the tender flesh of the fish. It's clearly just an ordinary fish. How did it become so delicious? Elizabeth was a little perplexed. Even though the fiery feeling in her body was making her a little uncomfortable, the delicious taste of the fish she had just tasted was simply too unique, and she couldn't help but cast her gaze toward the restaurant again. Should I go in? Elizabeth was feeling rather conflicted. If she went in, she couldn't guarantee that she would be able to control the violent and fiery flavor that was entering her body. However, the delectable taste of the grilled fish was constantly tugging at her heartstrings. This delicacy that she had never tasted before seemed to have opened a door to a whole new world for her. Her insistence on eating raw food completely crumbled in that instant. Compared to this delicious grilled fish, all of the other delicacies that she had once found to be tasteless and bland. A frost dragon that had suddenly appeared in the sky and was blasting flames out of its mouth attracted the attention of many people in the Aden Square. Giant dragons weren't very rare in Chaos City, but most of them were in their human forms. It was very rare for a giant dragon to appear in the sky in their dragon form and release a deafening dragon's roar. As such, it was very easy for them to attract the attention of the Grey Temple, which could lead to unnecessary trouble. She hasn't paid yet. Yarbemia was a little anxious as she looked at the empty seat. However, upon hearing the dragon's roar and seeing the frost dragon hovering in midair, her eyes slowly widened, and her mouth gaped open with incredulity. So this is a true giant dragon. Is she one of my brethren? No. I'm only a half-dragon. I don't deserve to be a member of the giant dragon race. A hint of anticipation appeared in Yarbemia's eyes as she thought to herself. However, that anticipation was quickly replaced by self-abasement, and she lowered her eyes as she tried to hide her horns as well. She wasn't a giant dragon, she was only a half-dragon. She couldn't transform into a giant dragon that could fly freely in the sky. Instead, she was just a weirdo with dragon horns and a dragon tail. That was quite a depressing thought to her. Perhaps this is just the first time I've eaten human food, and I'm not used to it yet. I should be fine if I change into some loose clothes. Why? Elizabeth murmured to herself as light flashed from her body, and she reverted back to her human form. Her tight-fitting blue and silver dress transformed into a loose-fitting blue and silver robe that was rather similar in style to Vivian's. She stepped forward in midair, and a large snowflake appeared beneath her feet. She then reappeared in the dining hall and sat down across from Vivian. "You're back again." Vivian raised an eyebrow at the sight of Elizabeth, and a peculiar expression appeared on her face as she looked at her clothes. "Wow, pretty big sister, did you go home and change into some new clothes so quickly?" Amy was also looking at Elizabeth with a curious expression. It was truly amazing how she was able to come and go in such an unusual manner. Frost dragons won't run away for no good reason. "I ordered this fish, so I'll finish it even if I have to kneel down." Elizabeth spoke with a serious expression. She picked up her chopsticks again, and slowly placed a piece of fish into her mouth with a solemn expression. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.